Game of Thrones, The Scheming Baratheon. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction. So don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 51, Second Meeting. After Illyria knew the truth and saw her sister getting ready to meet the man and using the perfume, she started teasing Ashera. She asked her if she would let the man have a part of her in the first meeting. Ashera was mad at Illyria, as Ashera would not do that unless she thought that he was the man she wanted. Illyria helped her sister make an excuse and leave the castle. She told Ashera that Ashera owed her favor before letting her go too. Ashera signaled Edward to follow her to the last stand in the inn. She did not want anyone to recognize her. She was the sister of the Lord, after all. Plus, everyone in Westeros knew about the famous Ashera Dane, so how could the small folks in Starfall not know her? For Edward gave her a small nod before following her to the last stand. The inn was not full by this time, so there were many empty stands in the inn. When both of them sat down, Ashera revealed a part of her face. She wanted to talk to Edward, so it would be improper without taking off her veil. "I see you are alright, Ed. I usually do not give people a second chance," said Ashera, trying to tease Edward with her smile. She was also waiting to meet him. She wanted to know at least if he was the heir of some lord. Her brother had told her that the young Lord Baratheon was coming to Starfall the next week to discuss some business. He wanted to introduce her to him, and if she could be his wife, Starfall would stand to gain a lot. When Ashera was annoyed, usually, she would not care and would just do what her brother told her. But after meeting Edward, she was not able to take him out of her mind. So she thought if the man she met the day before was the heir of a house, she might be able to convince her brother to pass on Lord Baratheon to her sister. Ashera had heard a lot about Lord Baratheon in the previous year. Everyone in Westeros had already heard at least a piece of news about him. And although Dorne always had disputes with Stormsland, it had been calm since a century ago. But she was not like her sister. Although her sister was daring like her, Illyria did not mind getting herself into a political marriage. But she hated something like that. She wanted to search for a man she would love, although he would also be an heir to some lord. "Enough of that, aren't you going to tell me your name?" asked Edward as he looked at her violet eyes. Edward was so mesmerized the last time he met Ashera and did not ask her about her name. That was a little rude of him. But since he saw her again, he wanted to know her name. "Ash. You can call me Ash," said Ashera as she looked at Edward. She did not want to tell him her name as many people heard about her. She wanted to know everything about Edward before telling him her full name. "Ash." Edward repeated her name multiple times before looking at her again. He did not know what to talk about as it was his first time to fall for a girl. So, all Edward did was stare at her without saying anything. Ashera stayed silent for a few minutes. She wanted to check on him this time, as she did not have the time to do that the last time. After some minutes passed and Edward did not say a word, Ashera got annoyed a little. She decided to start the conversation. "Stared enough," said Ashera with some sarcasm in her voice. She wanted to break this state and made Edward talk instead of just staring at her. He could at least stare at her breasts a little instead of her eyes. Edward did not say a word and just shook his head. He wanted to only stare at her eyes. But Edward knew that he might annoy her, so he shifted his gaze a little to take a breath. He then turned back to Ashera and started to talk. "So, Ash, you are not married, right?" asked Edward. That was the most critical question in his mind. If she said yes, he was ready to kill the husband. Ashera was surprised for a second. The first words that came from Edward's mouth were if she was married. They did not even know each other that well for him to ask this question. After being surprised for a moment, Ashera decided to answer this question to test Edward. She wanted to see if Edward only wanted her for her beautiful face and if he treated her as a slut. After all, when noticing a beautiful woman walking on the streets without guards, everyone would likely think she was a small folks. That would be the best guess if not a slut. "I am not. But might be in a few days," said Ashera with some mystery. She was referring to Lord Baratheon, who her brother wanted to introduce her to him. She wanted to see Edward's reaction after hearing such news. She wanted to know if he was serious enough to ask a woman, who he had just met, to marry him. After hearing this news, Edward's face turned dark. He was ready to kill the man if it was required. "Who is it?" asked Edward with an angry voice. He would challenge the man to ask for Ash's hand. If he refused, Edward would send his men to kill the man. No one was going to take Ash from him. Edward was ready to really kidnap her at the moment. Seeing that Edward was really furious, Ashra was pleased a little. At least Edward was serious a little about her and did not treat her like a whore. Now, it was the time to see if he would be scared if he knew that she was a daughter of a lord and she might marry a lord. 1. Chapter 52, Finding Out the Truth. "Look here, Ed, I think you are a genuine person and I like you a little. But I am a daughter of a lord in Dorne, and the person that I might marry is also a lord. So unless you are at least the heir of some land, no one in my family would even care," said Ashra as she looked at Edward's face. Was Edward going to back down after hearing these words? She hoped not. Ashra thought of Edward as a nice-looking and strong man. She hoped that he would not be scared by her words. As if Edward would care about any lord or an heir, so unless it is the prince himself, Edward would not put them in his mind. And if it's the prince, Edward would challenge him directly in a duel for the girl. Edward looked at her with determined eyes. He was not going to back down. He already thought that she might be from a noble house since she was this beautiful, not because every beautiful girl had to be from a noble house, it was just that Edward thought of this possibility. Ashra did not look surprised much. She saw that Edward's men always followed Edward and moved in some kind of formation. She thought he was a merchant at first, and he had just hired those men. But after she saw the way the men moved, she knew that they were soldiers. Edward must be an heir of a lord, but she did not hear about any lord who had visited Starfall in the past few days, for since Edward had such confidence, that meant that he was from a big house. Edward was also likely good with his sword. Seeing his body, she did not think Edward was a knight since he was still young. Although many knights achieved knighthood at this early age, why would such a knight appear in front of her? Since it came to this point, Ashra decided to tell him some of the truth. She liked his confidence, but she did not want him to embarrass himself in front of Lord Baratheon. "Listen here, Ed, I liked your confidence, but," said Ashra, but before she completed this sentence, Edward interrupted her. He always wanted to use Eddard Stark's famous sentence. "I will tell you what one of my friends always said. Everything before the word but is horse shit," said Edward with a smile. Ashra got confused for a moment before laughing as well. "Oh, Ned. Thanks, brother. You let me make her laugh," thought Edward as he found it somewhat funny. He would believe it more amusing when he figured out that he was talking to Ashra Dane. And Ned Stark was of the flies around her one. "Shut up, Ed, and let me finish. The one who would come is a lord of a great house. He is famous all over Westeros. He is also a strong man who became a knight at a young age," said Ashra, trying to warn Edward not to be cocky, especially in front of the young Lord Baratheon. Ed might think he was a strong man and go to challenge Lord Baratheon. He would get himself killed. Edward was confused at the moment. Really, the men in love lose their brain cells. Edward thought that he did not hear about any young knights strong enough to stand against him. 11. Seeing that Edward looked more confused, Ashra nearly cried. Was Ed living in a cave and did not hear about the achievements of the young Lord Baratheons? Even she was interested in the man. She could not help but start to explain who the man was. "Did not you hear about a young Lord Baratheon? Were you living in a cave before coming here? How the hell did you not hear about him? The man is known all around Westeros, as even the merchants of the free cities knew him. He would be coming to our house the next week, and my brother wants me to meet him," said Ashra as she wanted to explain the entire situation that she was going through. She was also saying that as a warning to Ed because she did not want him to get hurt. After hearing that, Edward's brain was finally able to connect back. His brain was screaming and insulting the hell out of him. How the fuck was he not able to connect the dots? A beautiful girl with pale skin, violet eyes, and long black hair, wasn't that the description of the fucking Ashra Dane? Edward facepalmed after hearing all this. Yet, he was literally the man that he planned to kill. Now, he became one of Ashra's flies as well. One Edward's men who occupied the 4 stands around them could not help laughing out loud. They could not help it anymore. They had been hiding it since the previous question. But with one glance, Edward was able to shut them up. Now, he had become the laughingstock of everyone. How could Edward maintain his men's respect after this? Was he this dull the whole time? Edward wanted to cry at this moment too. What a fucking irony. I was telling myself that she was not to my standard, and in the end, I became Ned Stark in front of her. I was not able to even think of anything. She is literally a witch. She is my witch. Better get her before anyone could even think of that, thought Edward as he found it a plot twist. To fall for this woman among all the others, it's a horrible destiny. One, I thought I was going to refuse to marry her. And since I would refuse, I would be able to do anything that I wanted Dorne and her brother. But now, what am I supposed to do? I am not giving on the part one crave from Dorne. I only have to find a way to achieve it without angering her. Or I would need to find a way to coax her after she got angry. But the real problem is Arthur. I was planning to be the one who would kill him, but I could not anymore, thought Edward as he was getting a headache from all this. Chapter 53, Taking Some Revenge. Edward had to amend his plans a little to be suitable for the new situation. He was not ready to cast Ashera away, but he also did not want a woman to control him, even if she was his wife. Edward just had to corrupt her thinking and make her a psychopath like him. If Ashera desired more power, he was sure that she would even betray the Danes for her children. It was an intriguing idea, and Edward was really thinking of implementing it. Seeing that Edward had fallen in thought, Ashera was a little disappointed. She thought that Edward was thinking again about his decision after hearing that he would have to fight Lord Baratheon. Well, how could she blame him? No one wanted to die. I know it's hard. You could forget about anything I said earlier. Ashera said that as she attempted to stand and leave, but Edward caught her hand at once. Sit down, said Edward in a threatening tone. He was behaving like an idiot for the past 2 days. Was he going to allow the reason for all that to leave just like that? Ashera took a glance at Edward before she sat again on her seat. She realized she behaved a little out of her character. Was she shy and wanted to leave because she was embarrassed? She was the daring Ashera Dane. She did not mind having an affair with the man she liked in Harrenhal. How could she get embarrassed just like that? Ashera could only look at the man that had caused this change in her character. What was he going to say now? She waited for his answer. Don't look at me like that. I would visit your brother when Lord Baratheon arrives. I am going to challenge him, said Edward as he wanted to torture her a little as she was the reason for his brain's malfunction. Ashera looked at him for a moment before smiling. She liked this side of him, as she always had a thing for the strong and daring men. They continued talking for another hour before Ashera excused herself to return to her home. Ashera wanted to know his real name and the house he came from, but Edward continued to avoid the questions. Edward wanted her to be in the dark till the time he met a brother. It was a good idea of revenge. Ashera was not satisfied with his answer. That was why they decided to meet in another 2 days. It would be the last time before Lord Baratheon visited her house. Ashera wanted to know Edward's identity before that day. She wanted to be able to say something about Edward to her brother. 5 days passed in a blink of an eye. During those 3 days, Edward was finally able to return to his normal state of mind. He was able to concentrate more. He did not think of Ashera the whole time like the first few days after he met her. Though, that did not reduce any of his determination to marry Ashera. He just was able to think more rationally when Edward met Ashera one time during those days. Although Ashera still tried to figure anything about Edward, she did not manage to do so. Edward was taking revenge on her for making him look like an idiot. Although it was his fault as he was the one who was so mesmerized by her beauty, he still blamed her for being so beautiful that he was not able to resist. Edward wanted to know more about Ashera, her personality, and her everything. So Edward spent his time with her talking about small things while she was literally dying with anger. Edward did not satisfy any of her answers. He only answered the irrelevant questions and asked her about the small things. Ashera left after that in anger while threatening him if he did not come, she would chop his little brother down there. She also warned him that Lord Baratheon was no easy opponent, and if they fought, Ed was going to lose. So she advised Ed to try and use his words and not his sword. Edward found it funny. She was warning him against himself. Would not it be an excellent play if he could appear with 2 characters at the same time? Edward dismissed this thought and tried to think of a more creative way to make it funnier when he visited the Danes. At the moment, Edward was on his way to meet Arnold Dane. Ashera's older brother gave this name to her unknown brother, formally. Edward was supposed to arrive on a vessel to Starfall. That's why he had taken a boat with his men and waited for their ship in the sea. That was his plan since he arrived at Starfall a week earlier. Edward did not plan to meet Ashera this early on. He was enjoying his time while gathering some information about her. He had deemed her unsuitable, even before meeting her. It was just that their fateful encounter that made him fall in love with her. After meeting the rest of his men on the ship and traveling to Starfall's port, Edward dressed himself nicely this time. He had been wearing ordinary clothes the whole week. It was just that Edward was hiding his identity and did not want anyone to think he was a lord. Of course, he did not raise his sigil or rode any horse in the city. Edward and his men were about to reach their destination. Edward did not bring his brother or his insistent mother. Cassandra wanted to come personally to talk about the engagement with House Dane, but Edward refused. He had no intention to marry Ashera, so why he would take his mother? Edward had brought 10 men when he came a week ago, and with the other 90 that he met on the ship, he had 100 men with him. At the moment, they were marching in a disciplined formation while riding on horses. Edward was riding in the middle. Chapter 54, Meeting with the Danes. When they were in front of the Lord's residence, they could see all the Danes waiting there. Arnold was in the middle with his newlywed wife beside him. Ashera and Illyria were standing to their right. After Edward got down from his horse and moved to Arnold, he noticed the look of shock that appeared on Ashera's face. "Yeah, take that bitch." Edward did not even greet her. He just got a quick glance from her face before shifting his eyes to Arnold. Ashera could not even say a word, or her family would know that she was sneaking to meet a man outside the castle to welcome, Lord Baratheon. "Welcome to Starfall," said Arnold as he came close to shake Edward's hand. It's great to see the beautiful city of Starfall." "Thanks, Lord Dane. And you can call me Edward," said Edward, trying to look cheerful. He was clearly in a good mood. He had taken revenge on Ashera and would be able to ask for her hand soon. The look of Ashera was also priceless, and Edward thought that Ashera would use this matter against him in the future. "This is my wife, Nyla. Those two are my sisters, Ashera and Illyria," said Arnold as he pointed to his wife, then to his sisters. He turned to look at Edward's expression after he introduced his sisters. He wanted to check if Edward was interested in any of his sisters. Although Illyria was young, she was just 4 years younger than Edward. Edward did not even flinch. He had controlled himself in the 4 days, and unless he wanted to show his emotions, no one would even figure out what he was thinking. But Edward just smiled while looking at them. In fact, he was only smiling at Ashera as he was still finding her expression funny. Not being able to figure what Edward was thinking, Arnold could only end the front door conversation. "Let's head to the hall, Lord Edward." The man was not able to treat Edward as a friend and call him Edward. Well, unless anyone were Edward's friend, they would not be able to call him just Edward. Edward's status was no joke after the last year when he transformed Stormsland into paradise. Dornish men were not as daring as their women. Ashera called Edward it on their second meeting. Edward nodded his head and followed the man towards the hall. Nyla followed them, but Ashera caught her little sister's hand and signaled her to wait for a second. Ashera wanted to tell her the truth before the others. Illyria was shocked after hearing that the man her sister was seeing was the same man that their brother wanted Ashera to marry. It turned that Lord Baratheon was more daring than both of them. He had played Ashera in his hands. Illyria found her sister's expression funny and just grabbed her breasts with a funny expression before entering the hall. "Please, have a seat, Lord Baratheon," said Arnold while pointing to the seat. Arnold wanted to be as friendly as possible. Although Dorne and Stormsland had many conflicts in the past, cooperating with Edward would yield many benefits, especially for Starfall. At this point, every lord or great lord wished to have some cooperation with Edward. Edward was a walking treasure trove in their eyes. Besides the transformation of Stormsland, the Vale and the North experienced many changes. The North, which was considered by all as the most deprived kingdom, showed some progress lately. Although not on the level to change its rank, it still made life somewhat more comfortable. Arnold also wished to have something like that. He knew he was not as close to Edward as the Lord Arryn of the Vale or the Lord Stark of the North. That was why he had wished he could betroth his sister Ashera to Lord Baratheon. "What do you wish to discuss with me, my lord?" asked Arnold with eyes filled with anticipation. "Any deal with Stormsland would fill the vaults with gold dragons. I won't beat around the bush. I came here to see if I would have my future wife from your house," said Edward with a calm tone. He was preparing to have a small deal with Starfall after refusing Ashera. But at this point, he had to give Starfall some benefits. Ashera was going to be Edward's wife, and he would give her house the best gifts. Edward was thinking of taking it slowly at first but decided against that after some thinking. Arnold was pleasantly surprised. He was disappointed after seeing no change in Edward's expression earlier when he introduced his sisters. Now, Edward was the one who was showing some interest. "Do tell, Lord Edward," asked Arnold with a smile in hidden anticipation. It was the most significant moment. It was the moment that Starfall was going to change permanently. "I wanted to take your sister, Ashra, as my wife," said Edward with a calm tone, again. It was as if Edward was discussing someone else's marriage and not him. The second that Edward said those words, Ashra and Illyria had just entered the hall. Ashra had some shocked and joyful expression on her face. She was shocked that the first thing she could hear was the word wife, but she found it pleasing to her ears. Illyria, on the other hand, found it more shocking. What shocked her was the progression of how this whole situation was all going. Edward had just met her sister a week ago and only had 2 meetings and an encounter with her. Was he asking for her hand as the Lord Baratheon or the unknown Ed? Arnold was also a little surprised by how forward Edward was. But what could he want more? Isn't that what Arnold hoped for from the start? So he ignored anything else and signaled to Ashra to have a seat. "You heard Lord Baratheon, Ashra. What do you think?" asked Arnold while looking at his sister as if he was saying, "I dare you to refuse." That was a daring threat, but Edward found it amusing. He found Ashra's expression cuter, actually. Ashra thought that Edward played her since the beginning. That was the reason why her appearance turned ugly at the moment. She was pouting while looking at Edward. It was as if she was promising to pay him back for all this one. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55, Taking Ashra to Storm's End. "Do I have a say?" mocked Ashra as she looked at her brother. Whatever she said would not even amount to anything. Her brother wanted her to marry Lord Baratheon, and she would marry him. Of course, she could refuse, but Arnold might blame her for wasting such an offer. At least, she knew a little about the man and had a liking to his character. "No," joked Arnold as he turned to Edward to see him looking at his sister with an amusing smile, which made her pout more. Arnold thought that there had to be something behind their interaction, but he decided to ignore it for now. She agreed, "Lord Baratheon, what are your plans next? Do we start with the wedding ceremonies at once?" asked Arnold as he wanted to seal this deal as fast as he could. Ashra and Illyria looked annoyed after hearing what Arnold said. It was as if their brother was selling them off rather than marrying them. Edward was also a little annoyed, but why should he care? Wasn't he going to have what he wanted? He might as well use this situation to incite Ashra's hatred towards Darn and the Danes, although Edward knew that it would not do much, as most of the females of the noble houses had the same fate. "I wish to invite Ashra to live in Storm's End for some months before starting with the wedding ceremonies. I would also extend the invite to her sister to accompany her. We could start with the wedding ceremonies in 2 months," said Edward as he looked at Ashra to see if she agreed. Getting a nod, Edward sighed in relief, secretly. This witch had captured his soul, and he was only trying to resist her influence. "To as you wish, Lord Baratheon. Now, we can discuss the marriage in detail," said Arnold as his real motive started to take shape. Arnold wanted to use this marriage to have the most benefits that he could get from Stormsland. Stormsland was now rich, and House Baratheon was now the second wealthiest house in Westeros. They were also not that far behind the Lannisters. Arnold wanted to get some goods and include Starfall in the trade network. Edward turned into his businessman mode at the moment. He negotiated the terms of the cooperation carefully. Edward would never come out as the loser of a deal in this life. Edward only promised to open a trade road by land to Starfall in the next 5 years. He would also add Starfall to the trade network when Narrow Hall's port started operating. No one knew what would be the kind of relationship between the two houses after the rebellion. So this deal would be on hold till then. But Edward was not that miser and gave them Ashra's weight of gold. Edward stayed in Starfall for a week to finalize most of the details. He continued his talk with Arnold in those days and gave him some benefits just for Ashra. Ashra and Edward had some real talk with each other after that day. Ashra was mad at Edward for playing her for a fool all that time. She continued to have her angry expression for the next 3 days. Edward did not even try to comfort her as he found that expression cute and beautiful enough that he just stared at her while she was nagging him. When Ashra returned back to her natural expression after those 3 days, only to annoy him after Edward said he loved it. Their relationship was so fucked up. Edward liked to annoy her, and she would pay him back. What a mess. 3. But it was apparent that the two had some feelings for each other, or Edward and Ashura would not behave like that. Edward had fallen deep for Ashura. It was as if Ashura had bewitched him with her charms. Although Edward appeared in control when he was with her, he was having a long battle with his heart using as well. Edward wanted to kidnap this witch and made her entirely his, but he was afraid of hurting her feelings and resisted himself to take it slowly too. Ashura was also getting trapped little by Edward's charm. She could notice that Edward cared about her. Although his action seemed different than the first 2 times that she met him, he was looking at her with the same look. It was as if he was trying to control himself and resist his urges. That was why Ashura liked Edward more. She also did not miss such an opportunity to tease him. She was a daring woman, and Edward started to like her personality. He thought that he would find it difficult with this bold personality of hers, at first, but as long as she only used it on him, he would not mind. Edward also got to know her sister, Illyria. She was such a lovable girl. Edward found that she had a similar personality to her sister, Ashura. For fuck's sake, why in 7 hells were the Dornish women so daring? Illyria did not even complete her 13 name day, and she was hitting on him. Edward knew that she was teasing him, but her words were an eye-opener. After this week was finally over, Edward boarded the ship with Ashura and Illyria. They were going back to Storm's End. The rest of the Dane would come to Storm's End in 2 months for the wedding ceremonies. Ashura did not forget to send a raven to her older brother Arthur. It was the 2nd month of year 279 AC. When Edward and Ashura were still in the sea, boarding the ship taking them back to Storm's Land, a raven delivered a message to Edward. The content of the letter made Edward smile a little. Edward was waiting for this news since the start of the year. It's finally starting, huh? Thought Edward to himself before throwing the letter in the fire. He then went on his way back to accompany Ashura. He was enjoying his time on the ship. Soon, the exciting events would start. Chapter 56, Planning a Tourney in Storm's End. What Edward read in the letter was the early news of the betrothal between Rhaegar and Elia Martell. Things were going to be exciting from this moment. Elia's escort would travel to King's Landing at the end of the year. It was perfect timing for him to be able to take Ashura. Ashura was supposed to serve as Elia's lady-in-waiting. It was good that he had taken her from Starfall before she followed Elia, or where he could find her again. Elia's escort would be attacked by the Kingswood Brotherhood. The things would reach a new highest after that at the tourney of Harrenhal when Edward was enjoying himself with Ashura and Illyria. While thinking about all that, I should organize a tourney in Storm's End to honor Stefan's memory. Robert should have held it by now if he was the Lord, but due to the busy schedule of last year, I did not have the time to do it. Now, it would be perfect timing. I could show the rest of the kingdoms how much Storm's Land has changed. I could even marry Ashura at the end after becoming the sole champion, thought Edward to himself after imaging all that. He could invite Rhaegar and the Lannisters as well. He would be able to make fun of Rhaegar and Arthur Dayne by marrying the latter's sister, while Rhaegar would be forced by his father to marry Elia. 3. Edward moved close to Ashura and held her hand. She was talking to her sister when Edward was thinking of all this. Edward wanted to tell her about his idea to see if she would like it. Ash, I intend to hold a tourney in Storm's End in 1 month to honor my father. What do you think if we hold our marriage at the end of it? Asked Edward while looking at her eyes. Ashura would be the lady of Storm's End sooner or later, and she had to have an opinion about this stuff. Ashura thought for a second, then smiled. She liked this idea a lot. She would always dream about something like that. You could see that when she attended the tourney of Harrenhal. And if Edward became the champion and named her his queen, Ashura stopped thinking at this point. Would not be the ideal moment? It would be great, my love. But you have to be the champion and name me your queen. You should also invite my brother and his wife. It would be great to hold our marriage at that moment. Ashura started to speak, and it seemed that was no ending for her imagination. Edward waited till she said all she had. Calling me your love this early? You are really bold. What if I was not able to control myself and ate you? Don't come to me crying then, said Edward while smiling at Ashura. He wanted to take her to his room and do some good things with her, but he always resisted himself. She would be his wife, not his whore. He could not treat her like that. Ashura started smiling at him while licking her lips, trying to seduce him more. If it had not been for her sister sitting next to them, Ashura would have gone and sat on his lap. Edward tried to change the topic by shifting his eyes towards Illyria, who was smiling at him. "What about you, Illyria? You also think it is a good idea, right?" asked Edward as he wanted to hear the opinion of the young Illyria. He needed to shift the direction of the conversation when the young girl started to tease him. "Yes, I also think so. Also, you should take me as your wife, instead of Ashera," said the young Illyria as she started teasing Edward and Ashera. Edward did not know what happened to Ashera in the show. She was supposed to be betrothed to Sir Beric Dondarrion, Lord of Blackhaven, but the marriage had never happened. "I am your brother by law, so stop with your little tricks, young lady," said Edward as he warned the young Illyria. The Dornish women were so daring, and Edward feared that she would dare to do more in the future. That would cause him to be uncomfortable. After that, they started to talk about the details of the tournament. Edward had thought of some ideas that would make this tourney the biggest in history. He also had to discuss with his brother and mother to hear their opinion. Edward spent the rest of the time with Ashera. He wanted to make her fall for him, so he did not leave her shadow for the rest of the journey. 3 days later, Edward's ship, Stormproud, docked in the new port. These were the effect of the new ship, its large size with the increased speed. They could take half the time to travel to the north now. It would only take them 6 to 8 days, depending on the weather. After Edward and Ashera landed, Edward could see his mother and the rest of his men waiting for him. He could not see Stannis, so Edward guessed who was doing something important. "It is great to be home, isn't it, mother?" said Edward while greeting his mother, but did not get any response from her. She was completely focused on Ashera as if he, her son, was not there at all. "You are really a beauty, as they say," said Cassandra, complimenting Ashera. She was pleased by how beautiful Ashera was and was more pleased that Ashera would be her son's wife. Edward wondered what his mother would do when she knew how daring Ashera was. Was she going to freak out? Edward was waiting for that to happen the next second when he saw another different Ashera. "It is great to see you, Lady Baratheon. I had always wanted to see someone as beautiful as you," said Ashera as she took the personality of the good daughter-in-law that wanted to please her mother-in-law. Edward could only sigh after dealing with those two women. Edward still thought that they were scary. "Let's move this conversation to the castle, mother. Are we going to stand here all day?" said Edward, who wanted to stay away from the two women in front of him. Chapter 57, Dealing with House Connington. "That's right. Where are my manners? Let's head to the castle," said Cassandra as she stopped the conversation and pulled Ashera and Illyria to her wagon. She wanted to talk to them for the rest of the road. While moving slowly to the castle, Ashera and Illyria were surprised again and again. They could see the paved roads and the new houses which Edward used cement to construct. He was slowly changing Storm's End to the center city of the world. Ashera had tasted Stormsland's wine and drinks before, and she thought that she could not find anything more fascinating than that. But 2 months later, she saw the glass products that got sold at sky-high prices. Then, she saw the paper and the incredible clothes sold in the market. Now, after she saw the port and the streets, she was amazed again. She began to see her future as Lady Baratheon of Storm's End. She could not help but take another look at Edward through the glass of the carriage. This man who was able to achieve all this was going to be her husband. Cassandra, who was observing Ashera, could not help but smile when she saw the look on Ashera's face. She also started to imagine her grandchildren that she wanted to see more than anything. When Edward finally reached the castle and met his brother Stannis, he took them towards the hall. He wanted to discuss the matter of the tournament with them. The tourney would be held to honor Stefan's memory, after all. Everyone's opinion on this matter was of great importance. Since Edward wanted to make this tournament the biggest in the history of Westeros, then he had to hear about all the ideas that could help him. After they entered the hall, they waited for a half hour before everyone was present. Edward then turned his eyes towards Stannis. He wanted to know why he did not see him in the Sea Ward. "I have not seen you in the port, Stannis. Did something happen?" asked Edward. He wanted to start by introducing Ashera to everyone, but he thought that something might be wrong. So he decided to ask Stannis before introducing Ashera to everyone. "Lord Armand of Griffin's Roost had just died. I was sending condolences to his son Jon, who became the new Lord of Griffin's Roost," said Stannis with his usually gloomy face. He was the acting lord when Edward was not in Storm's End. He was the one responsible for the stuff when Edward could not do it. "The Connington, huh? And now, that cunt Jon is the Lord of Griffin's Roost. There is no saving for them. Did he do anything suspicious after he became the Lord?" asked Edward without hiding his despise towards House Connington. Everyone in Stormsland already heard about the poor relationship between Edward and House Connington, House Fell, House Grandison, and House Catherine, especially the Conningtons. Edward did invite the other three houses when he gathered the lords, as he did not want them to suspect anything, but Edward never even sent a letter to the Conningtons. It was apparent that Edward did not see eye to eye with them. As for the other three houses, he just invited them but only invested a little in each of them. It seems that they had started another conflict with House Morrigan. Lord Morrigan had already sent a letter. It seems that John depended on Prince Rhaegar in this conflict to take some lands from House Morrigan, said Stannis with some anger in his voice. It was Stormsland, so how dare John Connington involve Rhaegar in this? Everyone in the hall was also angry after hearing what Stannis said. It was an insult to all the lords of Stormsland. The mood in the room turned gloomy after this. Everyone turned to look at Edward. They wanted to hear his order, as he was the one who always had a solution to every problem that Stormsland had faced. Edward indeed had some ideas. He was only trying to figure out the best way to torture House Connington. Edward wanted to humiliate them before the rebellion. After that, he would kill every one of them personally. Send a word to that cunt, John. Tell him if he did not return the lands that he took from Lord Morrigan, I would personally ride to Griffin's Roost and fuck the shit out of him. Even if he had the support of the prince, this is Stormsland, not Crownlands. And if Rhaegar tried to meddle in Stormsland again, send another letter to the prince and tell him that I, Edward, ordered this myself and that I had the permission of the king himself, said Edward as he looked at his brother and the rest. He was getting impatient with that fucking John. Edward still did not spread the rumor of John being in love with Rhaegar. He was only waiting till Rhaegar married Elia and for John to show his despise towards Elia. It would be the perfect time to spread it. He could also say that John already had a secret relationship with Rhaegar. As for the king's permission, Edward indeed had such a thing. Edward already sent a message to the king telling him that someone had planted many spies and assassins in Stormsland. They wanted to kill Edward as they did to Stefan. The king sent him back, ordering him to kill those traitors. Though, Edward heard that Varys, who had just started working for the king, suggested otherwise. He told the king to refuse what Edward wanted. It was the last time that Edward would be able to use the king like that. Aerys still had some trust for Edward. But Edward knew with Varys by the king's side, the king's trust would fade soon. Edward did not care much. He only wanted to use the king's permission against Rhaegar. Edward would not allow anyone to mess with Stormsland. Everyone was surprised by their lord's extreme orders. It was because Edward had changed a lot during the past year. If he was like a newborn stag before, he was more rational like the Horde's leader after this year. He would not act rashly and controlled his tongue, though his calm and cold personality had taken over. Edward would not allow any failure or any disloyalty. He killed every spy himself and hanged their heads on the city's gates. But Edward would always reward the loyal and hard-working men. That was why everyone believed more in him. They worked hard with Edward to achieve what Stormsland had reached in this year. Chapter 58, Storm's End's tourney's details. Although everyone was surprised, they still nodded their head. They were already angry at House Connington, and if their lord thought that this was the best way, then they would do it. Let's end this matter here. We would have a lot of time to teach House Connington a lesson in the future, said Edward as he did not want to think about House Connington. It was not suitable to talk about dead people. Yet, that was it. Edward thought since it would exterminate that house, it would be a waste of time to think about them. Then, I gathered all of you here today for two reasons. I wanted to introduce you all to the famous Ashera Dane, the sister of Lord Arnold Dane, the first of her name. She is going to be my wife. I intend to perform the wedding ceremonies in 2 months, said Edward as he pointed his hand towards Ashera, who was sitting beside his mother too. Since Cassandra knew that Edward would marry Ashera, she did not let the Permaidan leave her sight. Ashera was her hope. Ashera would give her grandchildren. Edward did not want to break her heart by telling her that she already had a granddaughter in the Eyrie. Robert's bastard daughter, Milestone, should have been born a little later after the death of Stefan. Congratulations, my lord, said everyone in the same tone. Did not that mean that they were going to have another heir to Storm's End soon? Isn't that great news, Edward? Did not you say you prefer to go to the brothel than marrying? Said Heldon, as he tried to joke with Edward, but he got himself a death stare from both Edward and Cassandra. What is the fuck, uncle? Did not you find another time to joke about this? I am trying to make the woman fall in love with me, and you just blow up everything away in an instant, thought Edward to himself as he felt Ashura's gaze towards him. Edward refused to look in her direction. He wished he could stand and give his uncle a few punches in the face. Not to mention Cassana, even Stannis and the rest of the lords wanted to cut Haldon's tongue. Stannis was finally relieved that his brother would marry, as he saw his two brothers whoring as a dishonor. The same for Cassana, who wanted to have a grandchild and had been nagging Edward since ever. Edward could only sigh and turn his eyes towards Ashura, trying to reassure her. It was as if he was telling her, "I will confess everything when we are alone." Ashura was still glaring at him while pouting. She did not hear about this side of Edward. She should have heard about something like that, as it should be known, should not it? Ashura could only agree, as they were still in an important meeting. She did not want to make the mood heavier than it was already. Cassana could only sigh while holding Ashura's hand. She swore that she was going to teach his brother a lesson. She was finally relieved that her son could keep his tongue from saying unruly words. It seemed that she had to teach that to her brother. Haldon could only scratch his head. He sensed that he had fucked up. He did not know that he would be beaten multiple times by everyone in this room when the meeting was over. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is a tourney. I intend to hold the tourney here in Storm's End. I wanted it to be the biggest in the history of Westeros. I would hold this tourney to honor our father's memory, said Edward while looking at Stannis and Cassana at the end of his speech. This matter considered the two of them, after all. Cassana was emotional at the mention of her dead husband, but still, she nodded her head. Stannis also nodded his head. He had also suggested such a thing to Edward after Stefan's death. Edward had told him that he intended to make it big, so he would need many gold dragons. So they had to wait till all the projects started to earn them gold dragons. His men and his father's advisors also nodded their heads. Edward had formed a consultatory council. This council had all the experienced men that helped his father, plus a few of his men. This council had many duties and held some power. Edward had done something like that to gather every help he could get. "When do you intend to hold it, my lord?" asked Mr. Jones. Edward did not implement his education plan to get rid of the Citadel influence yet. Plus, he trusted Mr. Jones, who was with his father since young. 2 months from now. I want to hold our wedding ceremonies after the tournament. The tournament would continue for 10 days, said Edward as he was explaining the specifics for the tournaments. I want you to supervise the building of the Colosseum, Edmund. It should be half finished, as I already ordered for it to build. I want it finished in 2 months. Would you be able to do that? Asked Edward as he looked at his steward, Edmund Buckler. I will, my lord, said Edmund as he looked proud as ever. Stannis, send a letter to every lord in Stormsland. Tell them that they had to send to come. They have to show the rest of the kingdoms our power. Also, do not forget to send a letter to House Connington. It is time to teach them some lesson, said Edward as he looked at Stannis. He thought that he could use this tournament as a way to humiliate House Connington. What about the prizes, my lord? Asked Emery Wild, one of his father's men. Yet, I was thinking about that, but I wanted to hear everyone's ideas, said Edward as he looked at everyone. Everyone started to express their opinion. Stannis and Edmund suggested a big prize of gold dragons, while others suggested a valuable set of equipment to the winner. After listening to everyone's suggestion, Edward raised his hand to make them stop talking for a bit. Chapter 59, Eye-Catching Rewards and Receiving the Guests. I heard everyone's suggestions. We would have a gold dragon prize for the winner of the 5 categories, except the joust. The winner of the joust competition will have 50,000 gold dragons. Plus, a dagger from Valyrian steel and the crown of eternal love that I made not long ago, said Edward in one voice, getting a surprised and shocked look from everyone present. One, not to mention the number of gold dragons, the Valyrian steel dagger would be a high-end prize that would give anyone the shock of his life. Even for them, they started having thoughts and getting greedy after hearing about such a reward. During the past year, the Shadow Legion was able to kill a master in Volantis. When they searched for anything valuable in his residence, they were able to find this dagger. Edward was shocked and ecstatic after hearing about this news. Edward even began to have thoughts about the masters of those free cities. Since the dragon lords that survived from the old Valyria had lived in those free cities, it meant that these cities had some secrets from the old Valyria. And after finding this dagger, Edward wondered why the other lords of Westeros did not think of this idea. Maybe they did not try to kill any of those masters to find about this information. As for the crown of eternal love, It was something that everyone had heard about. They heard about Edward's weird hobby, as Edward liked to collect all kinds of gems and precious ore and use them to make this crown. The merchants would bring Edward different types of jewels and valuable ores, and Edward would buy them all. Actually, Edward was building this crown for the moment he became the king. He would then use this crown as the token of his victory. But after meeting Ashera, Edward decided to modify it a little and present it to her. He could make another crown for himself in the future. Edward used many gems and much gold to make this crown. People said that the value of this crown was equal to building a whole city. That was the reason that made everyone in the hall surprised by what Edward said, except for Ashera and Illyria, as they did not know anything about it. Don't worry. I intend to participate in this tourney myself, as I wanted to present the crown to Ashera as a gift for our wedding. So, send the word of our wedding ceremonies to every lord in Westeros to invite them," said Edward with a calm voice. He was sure of his victory. No one was going to take anything from him. He would earn the gold that he would spend during the tournament. Everyone had a knowing look on their faces. No wonder the rewards are so valuable. Edward did not intend to give them to anyone in the first place. The lords looked a little displeased as Edward made a fool of them. They thought they had a chance, but Edward crushed it before they could even think. After discussing the matter for some more time, Edward ended the meeting. Everyone had a lot to prepare. He, himself, needed to prepare many things for this tournament. He had to supervise the preparations for this tournament and make sure that they had the food and the place. Although this was the steward's job, Edward did not want anything to go wrong with this tournament. Edward also had to train a lot. He feared that his body had become a little rusty because he did not have a good fight for some time. Edward planned to commit himself to his health training. He wanted to be in his best form when the tournament began. Edward also had to accompany Ashera. He wanted to use these 2 months to deepen their relationship. That was why, besides his training, he had to spend some time with her. 2 months flew by like the wind. The tournament of Storm's End was finally about to begin. During the last 2 months, Edward spent most of his time only training. If not, he would be with Ashera. Edward was finally able to reach a new level in his relationship with Ashera. She even agreed to change her name to Ashera Baratheon after their wedding directly. Although Edward did not have sex with her, the two of them became very close. Edward wanted to do her during the bedding ceremony. During the wedding ceremonies, Edward let his mother and brother take care of everything. They only came to him when Stormsland's new perfume was about to get to the market or when the preparations were complete. They only wanted him to check if everything was okay. After that, Edward returned to his usual routine. It was only until the first guest had come that he came out of his isolation. Edward had been receiving guests for the past half-month. The guests were here for the tournament or for attending the wedding. Edward had already spread the news about the tourney and its rewards. Stormsland had received a large increase in smallfolk, merchants, and many foreign guests from the free cities who came to watch or participate in the tournament. Besides the lords of Stormsland, who Edward ordered to come or send a representative, many lords and knights decided to attend this tournament. Lord Jon Arryn was the first to come. He brought Robert and Ned with him. Yohn Royce and some knights of the Vale were also with him. Lord Arryn was one of the 4 good friends of Stefan. In fact, if not for Aerys Targaryen, Edward would say that Jon was the closest to Stefan. When Jon heard that Edward held this tourney to honor Stefan's memory, he did not hesitate and at once took Robert and Ned with him. He arrived a month earlier than the time for the tourney. Lord Rickard Stark was the second to come. He was also one of the closest friends to Stefan, so he decided to attend this tourney, personally, although it had been a while since he had joined any tourney. Lord Stark brought with him his son, Brandon, and his daughter, Lyanna. He left his wife, Lyra, and his youngest son, Benjen, to take care of Winterfell. From Dorne, Edward welcomed Aberon Martell. Elia did not come. The poor woman had a weak body, plus she still had a wedding to prepare for in 6 months. Edward also welcomed Mace Tyrell from the Reach. He came alone as Lady Olenna Tyrell did not accompany him. Edward wished that she came as Edward always admired her. She had a grand political view, and if he could convince her to join his side, he would not have to attack the Reach. He would have an easier way to marry one of his sons to her granddaughter by then. But he knew how Mace was an idiot. The man would still join the Crown and fight against him. Although Edward wanted the Reach to join his side, he knew that they could not be trusted. He also thought that him controlling a part of the Reach was a better option, at least for now. Edward also welcomed his in-laws, the Danes. He gave them a grand welcome as he did not want to embarrass Ashura. Other lords from the north, the Vale, the Riverland, Dorne, and Crown lands joined the fun. It was the largest gathering of lords in all the history of Westeros. Only the Lannisters did not attend. Edward knew that Tywin was not that pity. The man might just have thought that there were no benefits for him to attend such a meeting. Even if it is beneficial to him, Tywin will not sit with Edward. He would, at most, send a representative. Edward predicted that only Jaime Lannister might come with Lord Sumner Crackahall, as he was the man's squire. But Edward threw this thought to the back of his mind. Why would he care that much about House Lannister? Was he in love with Tywin or something? But Edward was surprised the next day. As he was planning to receive Prince Rhaegar, who announced that he would participate in the tourney himself, he saw a scene that shocked him. Edward saw Tywin fucking Lannister riding on his horse beside the prince. Edward was greatly surprised by this. He did not think that Tywin would come himself, not to mention with Rhaegar. 1. Chapter 60, Tywin's Plans. But Edward was surprised the next day. As he was planning to receive Prince Rhaegar, who announced that he would participate in the tourney himself, he saw a scene that shocked him. Edward saw Tywin fucking Lannister riding on his horse beside the prince. Edward was greatly surprised by this. He did not think that Tywin would come himself, not to mention with Rhaegar. Edward had many thoughts after seeing this scene. Did his existence push Tywin to work with Rhaegar? But that was impossible, as Tywin would never accept the Targaryen, especially when Aerys betrothed Elia to Rhaegar. Tywin always wanted to marry his daughter to Rhaegar, so how could he accept that situation? Edward decided to investigate this matter after the tourney. Tywin was the only one that could create a variable in Edward's plans. And Edward could not accept that. Edward already had plans to fuck the timeline, but that was only after the main characters were born. He was not going to face the Night King himself. He preferred sending the others to die rather than himself. Why would he face the Night King head-on in the first place? He was not the idiot hero, Jon Snow. If they could not stop the Night King, Edward would take everyone to Essos and build an empire there. 5. Edward threw this thought to the back of his head, as it was not the time to think of such a thing. He walked to the price and said while bowing a little, "Welcome to Storm's End, my prince, Lord Tywin. I hope it was a nice journey," said Edward while looking at the prince and Tywin Lannister. Edward had got rid of his arrogant attitude, at least on the surface. He figured that what he did in the past could have caused his death. Edward was taking this world as the story. He never thought that he was not the hero of this world until lately. After some serious thoughts, Edward knew that he might die permanently this time. So that was why he decided to change his attitude, at least till he had the power to prevent such a thing. He made a decision to play from the shadows instead of the light. 1. It is great to see you again, Lord Edward. I have been waiting to see you again since our last meeting. I was sad when I heard about Uncle Stefan's death, said Rhaegar while remembering his last visit to Storm's End, when he also attended the tourney that Stefan had held. I suppose I have to call you Lord Baratheon now, do I? It had been some time since I met you. I was calling you a brat at that time, replied Tywin, who did not wait for a chance to make fun of Edward. You can call me whatever you want, Lord Lannister. You were my father's friend, after all, said Edward as he did not get agitated by what Tywin said. Tywin would always say such sharp words to provoke anyone. Tywin was a little surprised as he thought that Edward would reply with his usual arrogant attitude. It seemed that he grew a little since our last meeting. Despite our conflicts, he would be a great match for Cersei, as Rhaegar will marry that fucking Dornish girl, thought Tywin, who would always see Lannister's gains above all. When he remembered that he could not marry his daughter to the prince anymore, Tywin was a little angry at the Targaryens for all the humiliation he suffered under Aerys. Tywin was so angry after hearing Aerys' announcement of the betrothing of Rhaegar and Elia. Tywin did not forget his meeting with the Dornish princess when she proposed the marriage between their children. Tywin remembered how he had humiliated her while saying that Cersei would be Rhaegar's wife. But the news of the engagement between Rhaegar and her daughter came as a slap on his face. From that time, Tywin began to think of another plan. He wanted to choose another husband for Cersei, and he could not find any better than Edward. Tywin had always depended on that his daughter was going to marry Rhaegar. That was why he did not think of making an alliance with the other houses through her. And if his plans could succeed and he could end the Targaryens' region, the Baratheon's brothers were the closest to the Iron Throne. He just had to amend his relationship with Edward and end his betrothal to the Danes. 3. If Edward knew what Tywin thought, He would really stand and clap for his creativity. The man had devised a plan that included everything. Tywin was even ready to bury the grudges. "This way, Your Grace, Lord Tywin. Tomorrow is the first day of this tournament. I have prepared a grand welcome for all the lords today," said Edward as he accompanied Rhaegar and Tywin towards the Great Hall in the Colosseum. During this time, Jon was having a conversation with Lord Arnold Dane, Lord Rickard Stark, and some other lords. "You really lucked out, Lord Dane. Starfall will go through a qualitative change," said Jon as he congratulated Arnold sincerely. Jon was a good man who saw the good in everyone. He was one of the few lords that hated to play the game. "It is a great honor to hear that from you, Lord Arryn. I did not do anything. It was Lord Baratheon who took a liking to my sister and asked for her hand," said Arnold while smiling. He was behaving humbly at the moment. The man standing in front of him was the second father of Edward. And Edward had always respected Lord Arryn. Everyone could see that from the frequent visits of Edward to the Eyrie. Edward also involved the Vale in most of his plans. One Lord Arnold, "Do you think Lord Baratheon would add Starfall to the trading network that he created?" asked Lord Gargolin of Salt Shore. He thought he would also get to receive some benefits if Starfall was added to the trading network. Salt Shore, Lemonwood, and Sunspear would make great stops if the ships were to travel from Storm's End to Starfall. Most of Dorne's lords still did not know about Edward's plan to build a city located on the nearest island to Dorne. This city would play a prominent role in the trading network and may even snatch all the profit these cities could get. Yet, Lord Baratheon had informed me that he would add Starfall to the trading network in the future, and he would pave a road from Storm's Land to Starfall in the next 5 years. As for the water trading route, he said it would take some time as Starfall was a little far, but he would also add it in the near future," said Arnold with some excitement on his face. If Starfall was added to this network, they would get many Storm's Land's goods directly without the greedy merchants. They would also get many of the Free Cities products cheaply as 3 cities had already entered this trading network. "Could you ask Lord Baratheon to make Salt Shore one of the stops on the journey?" said Lord Gargolin with some hope in his eyes. He did not want to miss such a free meal. He would be able to make House Gargolin wealthier. "I will try to ask," said Arnold humbly, but everyone could see how proud he was. "It is better if you don't," said Bredon Stark. He had spent some time with Edward, and the two had become somewhat close. He came to know a little about Edward's personality. Everyone in the room turned their eyes towards him. Even his father did the same. So except for Lord Arryn, Robert, and Ned, everyone was basically asking Brandon for an answer. "Spill it out," said Lord Rickard. He also wanted to know the reason. He did not meet Edward except for a couple of times, and Edward would prefer to spend his time with Brandon, Howland Reed, and other young men. So Lord Rickard did not really understand Edward's personality. He could only be part of Edward's plans because of the betrothal and friendship between the young generation. Chapter 61, First Day of the Tournament. Edward does not like when someone asks him for something without getting anything in return. He will not go out of the norm unless it is for a friend or a family member. You know that Edward helped us based on Robert and Lyanna's engagement and his friendship with Ned. He would not get much from the North, but he only helped us because of these 2 reasons. Even if Lord Dane is going to be his brother by law, Edward will not do him any favors aside from what they both agreed upon," said Brandon, demolishing everyone's hope. Yet, why would Edward help them if he did not get anything in return? Perhaps, only Lord Arryn could ask him for such a favor. "I do not think he would even listen to his brothers on this matter," said Brandon as if he was thinking about something. Edward's personality was more and more to his liking. He would do small favors to a friend or a family member on his own. But Edward would refuse any favors they asked for themselves. Everyone turned to Lord Arryn to see if they could make him ask Edward for a favor. Lord Arryn could only shake his head. Even if he could do that, he could only do that once. Who was he going to choose from all those lords? While the lords were talking, Edward entered the hall. Prince Rhaegar, Lord Tywin, and some of the king's guards followed him. The hall turned silent for a moment. Everyone was surprised as they did not think Lord Tywin would come to this tourney. After the tournament of Lannisport that Tywin held in honor of Prince Viserys' birth, Lord Tywin did not participate in any tourneys after that. After some moments of silence, everyone stood to greet the prince and Lord Tywin while Edward tried to find his way to Lord Arryn's group. Edward was trying hard these few days to hide Lyanna Stark. He did not want Rhaegar to notice her this early, as Edward did not finish his preparations for the coming rebellion. Lyanna and Edward were now good friends. Edward even thought of her as his little sister. He did not want to sacrifice her for his goal, but how could he achieve his goal if Lyanna did not die? He did not mind if he fucked up the timeline anymore and thought about a solution. 5. After some serious thoughts, Edward came up with a plan. He would advise everyone against the things that were going to cause their death. If they took his advice and did what he said, he would do everything he could to save them. But if they still refused to take his advice, it would be their fault, and Edward would not even move a muscle to help them too. That was why Edward spent some time trying to change Lyanna and correct her way of thinking in the past 2 weeks. The problem was that Lyanna was really stubborn and refused to change her way of thinking. Unable to do anything more, he could only allow her to train with some of his men as she loved the way the men were training. He did not forget to tell her to accompany Ashera for the rest of the tournament. Edward spent the rest of the day accompanying the different lords of Westeros. He would greet some lord before shifting to shake hands with another. These few days were going to be longer than expected. Edward spent some of his time with a prince, who tried to recruit him again, and because Edward wanted to put an end to this matter, he could only tell Rhaegar that he would work as his hand when he became king in the future. Edward was not giving up or something, but as someone who knew what was going to happen. He decided to say those words to shut Rhaegar up. Edward did not why, but Lord Tywin was behaving weirdly. He continued to ask Edward if he was sure of his marriage with a Dane's girl. Tywin even advised Edward that he should choose, at least, a more powerful family because that would give him more benefits. What the fuck, old Tywin? Are you trying to find me a spouse yourself, or what? Don't tell me you are trying to push your daughter to me. I am not that adventurous, so keep her for Robert. Man, that was Edward's only thoughts. As Edward was truly impressed by the mentality of old Tywin, he wanted to ask him some questions. Did Tywin really forget about all the rumors that Edward had spread? Or did he think that Edward would forgive him for the assassination? Edward even had a thought to mess with Tywin by adding something to his drink so that Tywin could spend the rest of his days in Storm's End as a horny dog. After deep thoughts, Edward decided against it as Storm's End was not the right place to do so as it would also be a slap on Edward's face. Plus, if he did something like that here, Edward was sure that Tywin would go out of his way and kill Edward immediately. Edward could only spend the rest of the day like that. At the very least, from the next day, he would participate in the jousting and melee competition and would have to fake his words like that day. The next day, Storm's End entered its festive mood. Storm's End was able to receive more than 100,000 for this tourney. Edward had a big smile on his face seeing this scene. As Edward was looking at the surrounding, he could see that all the people were happy because of the biggest festivities. Blacksmiths and apprentice blacksmiths were busy working on the knight's armor and weapons. Merchants were busy trying to sell their goods while children were playing at the side. At the moment, it was the time for the first round of the competition. Edward had allowed his men to participate in any kind of competition they liked. He himself had registered for the melee and jousting competitions. It might be Edward's last chance to defeat all the famous Kingsguards and Rhaegar as Edward was not planning to take place in the tourney of Harrenhal personally. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62, First Match. The melee competition would be on the 4th day of the tournament. Edward would have to face Arthur Dayne, Barristan Selmy, 3 of his commanders, Edward's brother, Robert, and other participants. Yet, it was going to be a tough one, but Edward did not care. On the contrary, Edward found it a chance to show everyone his strength. Edward was now preparing for his first match in the joust. Edward was going to face a knight of House Frey. As Edward was wearing his armor and preparing for the match, he could hear the sound of cheering from the ring outside. It seemed that Rhaegar unhorsed his opponent and that cheering was for him. Enjoy it as much as you can. Today, your face will kiss the ground after I am done with you. I won't forget to use my full strength to make you fly, thought Edward after hearing all that cheering. Minutes later, it was finally Edward's turn. When he entered the field, the sound of the people's cheering was so loud that it could turn people deaf. The cheers were even much louder than what Prince Rhaegar had received. Of course, that was for multiple reasons. The most important one was that most of the Smaug folks were from Stormsland. And after Edward changed Stormsland and made the place more comfortable for people to live in, his reputation was multiple times that of Rhaegar. Edward was wearing his new designated armor. The armor was mostly black with yellow marks near the shoulder. Edward's new sigil was on the armor's chest. 7 Edward did not wait long and caught the lance at once. He waited for his opponent to be ready. 2 minutes later, it was finally the time to start. It was Edward's first time to partake in a tourney, so many did not think he would win. Edward did not find a good reason for him to participate in any tournament. He did not want to show his strength so that people could underestimate him. He thought of the tourneys as a way to waste money and time, but since his men liked to participate in them, Edward did not prevent them and let them do what they wanted. Not participating in any tournament did not mean that Edward was weak or he was going to lose. On the contrary, Edward had practiced a lot with his men, and no one could beat him. Yet, this sport required some techniques and strength, and Edward had both. He had spent the past 2 months training seriously to beat Rhaegar. Edward held his lance high enough while letting his horse do the job. Before his opponent's lance could touch him, Edward avoided a little before thrusting with his lance at the Frey's knight, unhorsing him at once with some injuries. The people around went quiet for a moment before exclaiming out loud that the entire jousting area was vibrating. Edward smiled victoriously while waving to the people who were shouting the mighty stag as loud as they could. Edward then walked to the waiting area. It was the only match for that day. He would have to wait for the next day to have his second match too. After taking off his armor, Edward visited the other fields to check on his men. The archery competition was held on the first day, and some of Edward's men decided to participate in the archery category. Edward decided against it as he wanted to hide some of his cards. He did not use a bow in public to hide the fact that he was also an excellent archer. For Edward visited the archery field when he found that the competition was about to reach its end. From the 8 commanders under Edward, Robin Hood, and the dead William Ark, were the best archers. They were even better than him. Edward had to admit that he was jealous of these 2 men, at first, but he had already changed this mentality of his. He just trained himself to become better than them. They were amazing archers that could use the bow as if it was a part of their body. It was a great loss for Edward when William Ark died in the assassination. That was the reason why Edward could not forgive Tywin. Plus, if he made peace with Tywin, his promise to his men would be for nothing, and Edward did not want to break his promise that he made to his men. Edward could see Robin Hood on the field while using his bow to fire multiple shots in the sky. The arrows were swaying at the sky's wind, and the crowd was following the arrows with their eyes. The first one hit the bullseye, followed by the second penetrating the middle of the first one, then the third penetrated the second two. The crowd did not wait long, and at once, the clapping and cheering covered the archery field. Edward could not help himself as he started clapping as well. He had to admit that he still had a long way before he could beat Robin. That was one of the reasons why he decided not to participate, as he knew he could not win against his deputy. Robin was smiling while greeting the crowd. This was Robin's day to shine, as Edward did not allow his men to show their proficiency in archery and spears before. It was a way to hide their strength, so all of them agreed. While Robin was going to receive his reward, he took notice of Edward, who was still clapping for him. Robin was touched and bowed his head a little as a way to thank his lord for supporting him. The day went like this. Everyone could see the success of this tourney from just the first day. After reviewing the finance report, Edward could see that he would retrieve everything he had spent in the previous 2 months during the remaining 10 days. After checking the results of the first day, Edward was surprised that he would face Sir Ronald Connington, the one John Connington would appoint as the Castellan of Griffin's Roost when John went after Rhaegar. Edward decided to kill Ronald in the next match. It would serve as a lesson to House Connington. Yet, this was going to be the first retaliation of Edward against that cunt, John. Edward did not care about the consequences, as this was a fair competition, and anything could happen. After having this thought, Edward went to sleep. He had to be prepared for the next day. Chapter 63, First Move Against House Connington. The next morning, in the joust field, Edward was wearing his armor and getting ready for the second match. This match was going to be overkill, literally. After wearing his black armor and entering the field, Edward picked up his lance among the loud cheering. He had an important job this time. Edward had to be accurate and control his lance well enough to push his lance to a certain point of Ronald's neck. Taking a deep breath while looking at Ronald, who was still preparing, Edward concentrated as much as possible. When the match finally started, Edward was observing every small detail from his own horse's movements to Ronald's horses, and finally to their lances. Edward decided to miss the first round as he did not want anyone to figure his real motive. The first round passed without any problem. When the second round started, Edward lifted his lance high enough and pushed it hard towards Ronald's neck in a fast move. The lance broke on Ronald's armor, but a small shard of the lance found its way to Ronald's neck. Before anyone could comprehend what happened, they saw Ronald's dead body fell from his horse with a shard of the lance deep in his throat. Surprised and frightened screams filled the field at once. It was the first death since the start of the tourney. Edward had to play his role as the Lord of Stormsland. He had to act like the hero that would save the day, so he jumped from his horse at once and reached the dead body of Ronald. "Bring Mr. Jones at once," shouted Edward while looking at the guard. Edward was smiling in his heart while applauding himself for this perfect play. He liked to play from the shadows as no one would know what he was doing while Edward got what he wanted. The guard ran at once to the outside to bring Mr. Jones, while Edward instructed other guards to carry Ronald's dead body. Edward could hear the crowd talking about how kind he was and how he cared about his opponents, while the truth was that he did not give a shit about his opponents. It was very easy to play with people's hearts and use it in his favor. When Edward walked to the waiting area, he could see the guard standing beside Ronald's dead body. It did not take long before the news reached John Connington's ears. He was staying beside Rhaegar since the first day. When John heard the news, he was furious and came all the way running to the guests' waiting area with the prince. When he saw his cousin's dead body, his eyes turned red from anger while looking at Edward as if he wanted to kill him. Mr. Jones did not take long before he arrived, and when he confirmed that Ronald was dead, Edward could see that John was going crazy. He came close to Edward and held his shoulder. "You did this, did not you?" said John with anger in his voice. Edward was pissed by John after hearing these words from a cunt like him. He decided to show them his arrogant attitude. How dare this fucker put his hands on Edward's shoulder? If Edward wanted to kill him at this moment, he would, even if Rhaegar was standing in front of him. Edward pushed John's hand away with some strength. He did not care if he caused him some injuries at all. "I dare you to do something like this again. The next time you do something like this, your head will be the only part of your body that would return to Griffin's Roost," said Edward while threatening John in front of Rhaegar. He did not care about Rhaegar's opinion at all. Edward was just missing 2 more years of preparations to start the rebellion. He had already decided to start the rebellion even if Robert did not. Rhaegar tried to meddle and solve the tension between the two. He pulled John back as he was the one in the wrong. It was the first time that Edward spoke like this since the start of the tourney. "Back off, John. Lord Baratheon would not do something that would dishonor his reputation. It was a fair fight. It was just an accident," said Rhaegar as he tried to stop John from what he was doing. What Rhaegar said was the truth from his point of view. Since Edward had always let the people see how much he cared about his reputation, many people thought if they could hurt his reputation, then they could hurt Edward. But in fact, Edward did not really care much about it. But since no one could discover anything, why he would not enjoy this reputation? "I am sorry for my behavior, my prince. But I think Lord Baratheon did this on purpose. He had already threatened my house 2 months ago. I am sure he did this on purpose," said John, trying to incite the prince against Edward. He wanted to use this accident to make Edward stay away from Rhaegar. As if Edward cared about Rhaegar in the first place. Rhaegar was the one pestering him non-stop since their first meeting. Edward looked at John as if he was an idiot. He wanted to tell him that he was planning for the rebellion against Rhaegar and his father, so why he would care about them? It was only 2 years, that was the period that Edward had to wait to make all those flies fuck off. Why would I care about any dog that started barking in front of my house? As for the threat, yeah, I did it. And if you had the balls to talk so loud, why did you return the lands to Lord Morrigan? If you did not return the lands, I would have respected you. But it's a shame that my sword would have to wait a little more before tasting your blood," said Edward as he let his arrogant personality took over him. He did not stand this cunt John, nor his kissing ass shit. John was looking at Edward angrily. House Connington was the only house that did not receive any benefits from House Baratheon. In fact, it was the other way around. Edward had paved cement roads between Storm's End, Tribes Cave, Helltown, and Crow's Nest. So they did not receive any goods. Griffin's Roost started to lose its population due to this matter too, and due to Edward's threat, John had to return the lands he took from House Morrigan using the prince's authority. That was why John hated Edward to the core. He wanted to kill him above anything else. The problem was that John had a natural fear against Edward. He did not know the reason, but he had different nightmares, and all of them ended with him getting killed by Edward. "You," said John with an angry voice. Edward was insulting him and the prince at the same time by calling him a dog. Chapter 64, Getting Annoyed at Rhaegar. When John turned to Rhaegar, wanting to complain to him, he found Rhaegar looking at him begrudgingly. It was John's fault that Rhaegar got insulted in the middle. Plus, Rhaegar was trying to earn Edward's favor for the past 1.5 years. But now, this cunt John was ruining everything. John could not utter a single word and could only shut his mouth after seeing the angry look Rhaegar was giving him. "Let's forget about this unpleasing memory, Lord Baratheon. I knew you did not mean something like that," said Rhaegar, trying to fix the situation. He was afraid that Edward would go back on his word. Rhaegar was feeling good in these 2 days after getting Edward's confirmation that he would work as Rhaegar's hand when he became the king. "As I said, I would not care about some barking dog who seeks his owner's attention," said Edward expressionlessly. He was still using his arrogant personality, so his word would be as vicious as always. Rhaegar and John's expressions changed after hearing those words. After taking a deep breath, Edward's red eyes went normal. He returned to his calm and collected self. "Sorry for that, my prince. But when the anger took over me, I would say some unpleasant words. Maybe it is Baratheon's curse. Ours is the fury, a funny motto, isn't it?" said Edward while throwing the blame on Baratheon's bloodline. As if understanding something, Rhaegar nodded his head. He had something about that before. No wonder there was such a change in personality. "Does this thing happen to all the Baratheons? I had heard before about some incident with Uncle Stefan. Maybe it had something with the Baratheon's bloodline," thought Rhaegar to himself, as if understanding something significant when in fact, it was Edward's bluff from the start too. "It's not your fault, Lord Baratheon. It was John who did not show respect. Can you just explain what happened?" said Rhaegar, trying to lighten the mood. Although he found Edward's words earlier a little disrespectful, everyone could do the same in such a situation. Plus, it was his friend, John, who acted out of the line when he spoke. Rhaegar was not going to lose Edward's talent for such a trivial matter. Rhaegar decided to have a real talk with John when they went back. Edward looked at Rhaegar while showing a gentle smile. He practiced a lot to reveal such a smile. Although he was annoyed a little by Rhaegar's question, he still replied with a smile. "Rhaegar, you motherfucker. You could have asked anyone in the field, but you have to ask me that, in order to show me who the boss is, right? I can't wait to smash that head of yours. I was thinking of hiding in the shadows and let Robert kill you himself, but I changed my mind. If I did not cut you little by little, I am going to chop my cock myself and replace it with a woman's pussy," thought Edward while still smiling at Rhaegar. He hated this attitude of Rhaegar, and whether Rhaegar did this purposely or not, Edward's hatred was over the top. "I was only doing my job, my prince." During our match, the first round passed without any injury or anyone unhorsed as normal. When we were on our second round, I managed to break my lance against Sir Ronald's armor. Unfortunately, a small shard of the lance escaped and reached Sir Ronald's neck. At once, I ordered a guard to call Mr. Jones, but by the time Mr. Jones came, it was already too late," said Edward with his innocent smile. He started to get addicted to this act where he played the victim or the hero. Edward could see the knowing and the understanding look on Rhaegar's face. Hearing Edward's explanation, and Mr. Jones, confirming what Edward had said, Rhaegar could rest assured. "So it was like that. Sorry for the inconvenience, Lord Baratheon. You really did all you could do," said Rhaegar with his striking smile while sighing internally. Although he wanted to use Edward's talent, he was afraid that Edward really killed Sir Ronald on purpose as a way of revenge against his friend, John, and him. But after hearing the whole story and the confirmation from multiple parties, it seemed that it was really an accident. Rhaegar could sigh in relief and could trust Edward for now. Rhaegar was afraid that Edward still had his wild ambitions from back then, and what Barristan Selmy said might be true. Rhaegar had just recruited Edward to his side and was not sure that was a sound decision. But after everything cleared up, Rhaegar could rest assured, at least for now, and smile at Edward with a light heart. "If this is all, I will see you again, Lord Edward. I still have a match after a while," said Rhaegar as he wanted to excuse himself to his tent. He had to prepare for his next match. "Sure thing, my prince. I would excuse myself and let you prepare," said Edward with the gentlest smile that he could muster. Although he was mocking Rhaegar inside his heart, Rhaegar did not have to know that, did he? Edward had already taken off his armor before the prince arrived. So he already marched to the outside of the tent. When he passed by Jon, he gave him a little mocking smile. "Don't worry, little cunt. Your head would be the next. I will kill every possible heir to Griffin's Roost, at first, and send you their heads before making you a eunuch. I would slaughter the rest of the Kenningtons at the time of the rebellion," thought Edward while giving Jon an amused smile. He really liked the little game he was playing right now. Edward hoped that his next opponents would be from the other three houses. He wanted to have a little fun. After Jon saw Edward's mocking smile, he got angry at once and was sure that Edward was lying the whole time. Edward killed his cousin on purpose and was only pretending to be innocent in front of the prince. Jon turned his gaze towards the prince as he wanted to tell him about Edward. He was sure that Rhaegar would listen to him as they were childhood friends after all. After retreating to their tent and driving everyone out until only Jon and Rhaegar were there, Jon started talking. "My prince, I am sure that he killed Ronald on purpose. I saw his smile when he left the tent, and I am sure he was only pretending to be innocent. I think we have to pun," said Jon, but he did not have the chance to complete his sentence as he was interrupted by Rhaegar. Chapter 65, Rhaegar's Fears. "Enough with that, Jon. We already confirmed what Lord Baratheon had said from multiple witnesses. I knew you do not like him, but do not act so low and start slandering him," said Rhaegar with an annoyed expression. Was Jon on his side or his enemies? Why was he trying to ruin everything quiet lately? "But, Your Highness," said Jon as he tried to explain himself, but Rhaegar did not give him the chance to finish. "I said enough with this already. You do not have to say anything regarding Lord Baratheon. Where's Sir Barristan and Arthur?" said Rhaegar as he tried to change the subject. He did not want to hear more complaints from Jon regarding Edward. Rhaegar wanted to ask for Barristan and Arthur's opinions. Jon could only shut up and trying to have Sir Barristan and Arthur's support before opening this matter again. "They should be in the jousting field, Your Highness. Arthur's match should be starting now and Sir Barristan must have gone to watch him. Would you like to go and see Arthur's match, my prince?" said Jon as he wanted to go there and get Barristan's support. He wanted nothing more than killing Edward at the moment, and since he could not do such a thing, he had to have the prince's support. "Arthur is going to win. It is still the second match, after all. I would rest a little before heading to the waiting area for my match. You can go and watch Arthur if you want," said Rhaegar as he retreated to his chair while holding his harp. "As you say, my prince. I would like to excuse myself," said Jon while retreating to the outside of the tent after getting Rhaegar's permission. After Jon exited the tent, his expression changed. He had to find a way to convince the other two to condemn Edward. Jon was also so angry that his prince did not believe him. Rhaegar was his love, and it hurt him that Rhaegar trusted Edward that much too. While Jon was thinking about this, Rhaegar had other thoughts. Rhaegar did not believe Edward completely, but there was nothing to prove otherwise. The witnesses had said the same thing, and Rhaegar could not think of how Edward could manage to control the lance so that a shard would penetrate Ronald's neck. "What should I do? I am afraid that Edward would use his position as a hand to kill his enemies. Was it the right decision to recruit him? Should I take Sir Barristan's words for it and don't trust Edward?" Rhaegar was in deep thought. He was afraid for his life at the moment. If Edward could do such a thing to Sir Ronald in a jousting match, he could do the same against him. Would Edward kill him in the same way? The seed of doubt started to take over Rhaegar's heart little by little. If Edward took the position as Rhaegar's hand, their relationship would turn around after some time. Their relationship would be like Aerys and Tywin's relationship. Rhaegar would fear that Edward might kill him anytime one. Rhaegar decided to play a little on his harp to take some burdens from his shoulder. The music always treated his soul. After some time had passed, Rhaegar returned to normal again. After some serious thoughts, he figured it would be impossible for Edward, who had never participated in any tourney before, to do something like that. Before long, Sir Barristan and Arthur came back with Jon. When they took Rhaegar's permission to enter the tent, they saw him getting ready to leave for the waiting area. "We are here, my prince," said Sir Barristan while bowing his head. Barristan and Arthur came after being incited by Jon. Jon had told them about the situation with some extras to make Edward appear like the evil he was. But Jon did, not that Barristan and Arthur had already heard about the matter. Both of them thought it was normal. As jousting's experts, they knew that something like that could happen, so they did not get swayed by what Jon said. Both of them just followed him after knowing that Rhaegar wanted to see them. "Congratulations on winning your second match, Arthur," said Rhaegar to Arthur with a smile. Without asking about the results, he knew that his friend would win. "I am grateful for your praise, my prince," said Arthur with a smile. Rhaegar smiled and started explaining what happened between him and Edward. "What do you think?" asked Rhaegar with a smile. "Although I still don't trust Edward, I had to admit that his personality changed a lot after he became the Lord. As for the incident, I don't think that it was on purpose. We all have taken part in jousting and know that incidents could happen," said Baratheon, expressing his opinion. He had noticed Edward's change after some interactions with him in the past year. "What about you, Arthur? Edward is going to be your brother by law," said Rhaegar while looking at Arthur. He knew that Edward and Arthur had some problems with each other, even after Edward's betrothal to Ashera. "He already said it when we met a month ago. He said directly in my face, 'I don't like you, Arthur. Plus, I think you are a little annoying, but for Ashera, I will try to get along with you,' was what he said to me. And honestly, we both don't get along well. He is cunning as always, but his personality had seen some changes. As for this incident, I can't really tell if it was really on purpose or not," said Arthur, after some thinking. He told Rhaegar about his meeting with Edward before, but he wanted the other to hear it too. He knew that Edward was cunning, and if he wanted to hurt a knight from the Connington's house, he would do it. Rhaegar retreated to his thoughts for a while, but after a moment or so, everyone could hear him sigh. "What do you think I should do, you two? Is it a wise decision to recruit Lord Baratheon to our side, or is it a reckless one?" asked Rhaegar while looking at Baratheon and Arthur. He ignored Jon's opinion completely. He knew that Jon's opinion would be biased at the moment, and it would be better to hear the other two's one. Chapter 66, Stannis' Sharpness and Edward's Viciousness. "I don't really know what to say, my prince. No one could say anything about Lord Baratheon's talent. Everyone could already see how he changed Storm's End and Storm's Land by now, but what I fear the most is what he hides," sighed Baratheon as he gave up on judging Edward anymore. He did not know if Edward was bliss or a calamity. "He is unique, your highness. But I won't be able to give an honest opinion since he would marry my sister. You are the one who gets to decide after all, so see if he fits your criteria," said Arthur with his calm tone. He would not meddle in this matter. He did not like Edward at all, but he wanted his sister to live happily. Rhaegar could only nod his head after hearing the others' opinions. He suspected Edward, but it seemed that his suspicion was without necessary. While Rhaegar was thinking that, Jon, who was standing behind the other two, was fuming with anger. He had exaggerated the situation earlier and assumed that these two would be on his side, but it seemed that he thought wrong. Although the other two did not hide their suspicions, they still sang praises of Edward. Jon felt betrayed at the moment and thought that he had to take action himself. He assumed that he was the only one who knew Edward's hidden intention and the truth behind it, and that he was the only one who could take precautions against the man. While all that was happening, Edward was in his tent. Cassandra and Ashera were accompanying him there. Cassandra came to see how he was doing while Ashera just came back from the Dane's tent. Stannis came after he heard about the death of Ronald Connington. He knew that was his brother's doing and that his brother did that on purpose. Stannis did not care much as he was also annoyed by House Connington. Due to Edward's interference and the rumors that he had spread that made House Connington the house that used the crown to take lands from the other lords, all the lords of Storm's Land saw them with some hatred. If House Connington did that to House Morrigan, they could do the same to other houses. As the result of this hatred, House Connington got isolated from the rest of the lords of Storm's Land. Even the other three houses that would stand against the rebellion did the same. The Conningtons began losing gold dragons, their political power as the marriages with the other houses got postponed as a result. "Edward, you did it on purpose, did not you?" asked his mother. She was feeling a headache right at the moment. She was sure that her son was the one behind the accident. "Mother, I knew you are against such acts, but please don't interfere in this matter. I am the Lord of Stormsland. You could not disagree with every decision that I made. I am doing this for our family. If you disagree, just turn the other way around," said Edward with some annoyance. He had to let his mother know that he had a bottom line. Yet, she was afraid, but he was doing this for himself and his children after him. Cassandra got surprised a little by what Edward had said, but it was indeed true. Although she did not undermine Edward's authority, she already had heard his plans earlier and should know his stand by now. Cassandra could only sigh and decided to let Edward do whatever he wanted. She knew whatever she said would not change Edward's mind after seeing his firm stand. Cassandra could not also persuade Stannis as he supported his brother's decision. She could only prepare herself if anything wrong happened and send Ringly to Essos. She had to let the Baratheon's bloodline continue. The poor woman did not know that her son, Ringly, would not help continue the family but put an end to it. Instead, is there any point of doing this now, Edward? We are not going to attack the Kenningtons anytime soon, so why the rush? Asked the smart Stannis. He did not see any benefits of killing Sir Ronald at the moment. I did it for 3 reasons, Stannis. First, I wanted to see House Connington's attitude and reaction. If they changed their attitude or knew how to hide their anger, it would be challenging for us to do anything to them. But after what that cunt, Jon, did, we can now isolate Griffin's Roost even further. Said Edward, getting a nod from Stannis. It would be really a problem if Jon hid his anger and tried to get close to Edward's side instead of hating him. At that point, Edward would not have a reason to do anything further. The second is to gauge Rhaegar's attitude. I wanted to see if he would help House Connington if I took action before executing our plan. And if I could, I wanted to take them apart so that we could finish House Connington once and for all. It seemed that their friendship is still strong. Said Edward as he explained further, getting a confused look from Ashera. Edward still did not tell Ashera about any of his plans. He loved her, but she was Dornish and a friend of Elia Martell, who would marry Rhaegar. Edward had been working non-stop to change her little by little. He wanted to increase her loyalty to Stormsland and only to Stormsland. He wanted her to be cruel, even to the Danes. 7 Edward did not explain anything to Ashera and continued explaining to Stannis. The third is my plans to kill all the possible heirs to House Connington from the younger generations. Sir Ronald is just the start. His sons and cousins are next. Said Edward to everyone with a cruel smile on his face. Cassandra was shocked and started speaking at once. But they are just children. Are you going to kill a child? Asked Cassandra as she did not expect Edward to be this cruel. And I killed the yet unborn children in their mother's wombs if it meant that I protected my family by doing that. Said Edward with a determined voice. He scared Cassandra and Ashera a little by his words but got a nod from Stannis too. Although Stannis thought it was not honorable to do so, he still agreed. If killing those children meant that the rest of Stormsland's children would be safe, he would do such a thing. For Chapter 67, A Real Talk with Ashera Part 1. Stannis, take Mother and return to the castle and explain to her how she should be supportive of our plans. Said Edward as he was looking at Stannis. Cassandra always had a soft spot for Stannis, who did not know how to smile, so it was better for Edward to let Stannis do this job. Plus, he had a lot that he wanted to talk about to Ashera. Stannis nodded his head while Cassandra shifted her eyes between Stannis and Edward for some time before exiting the tent and following Stannis. At the moment, it was only Edward and Ashera in the tent. Although it was not the most suitable place to persuade her as Edward preferred to tell her in bed, Edward still decided to explain to her. Come here, Ash. It is a time for us to have some serious talk. Said Edward as he pointed to his lap. He wanted her to sit there while he explained to her. And he said that with such a solemn face. Like hell, you would do such a thing, dude. I swear if your hand did not play a little here and there, you would not be a man. For Ashera smiled a little and listened to Edward. She sat on his left leg while looking at his face. She was really a daring woman. It was Edward's fortune that he had picked her before she had gone to King's Landing, or this girl would have fucked a man here and there. Ashera also wanted to know what Edward was planning for, as she was going to be the man's wife, and his decisions would also affect her. Ash, you know that I love you, right? Said Edward as his hand sneaked to her breasts from above her clothes. 5 Ashera started feeling the heat at that moment and wanted nothing more than jumping on Edward and taking his clothes off. But for the sake of the future, she had to resist his approaches and listen to his words carefully. Said Ashera with a moan escaping her mouth in the end. She decided to tease Edward a little as he was teasing her and decided to move in his lap. Let's stop the teasing a little. I wanted to talk to you seriously this time. Said Edward as his tone changed. He wanted Ashera to have the same mentality as him. 7 Ashera looked at his face and seeing his serious expression made her decide to stop what she was doing. For our future children, would you do anything for them? Asked Edward in the same solemn tone. Every mother had the same weakness. In front of their children's welfare, they could even poison everyone in the world too, of course. Is this even a question? said Ashura with a determined voice. She fell in love with Edward in the last 2 months and wanted nothing more than to bear his children. They would be the fruits of their love, and with Edward as their father, she was sure they would have a good life. What if your Danes family stood in their way? Are you going to help the Danes and suppress your children or help your children against the Dane? Asked Edward. His questions were getting more severe and grave. How would Ashura handle such a situation? Ashura's expressions changed at once. She thought Edward would have a conflict with her family. What do you by that? Asked Ashura in somewhat an angry tone. She did not want Edward to have any issues with her family. They did not even marry, yet, and Edward was thinking of going against her family. What I am saying is, what if House Dane stood with other houses against your children or me? Are you going to side with the Danes as well? Said Edward. If Ashura's response was not to his liking, he was ready to advise her. But if she did not take his advice, he was set to lock her up and make her a trophy wife. He would leave the 7 kingdoms as a gift to his children, and even his wife could not prevent that. Ashura's expression eased a little after hearing his explanation. She started to think about such a situation. After a few minutes, Ashura reached a conclusion. Although she loved her family, Edward and their children would be her top priority. She would protect them and help them against anyone who stood against them. Though, Ashura would prefer to persuade her family first in such a situation. But if they still stood against her husband and children, she would not hesitate to protect them by any means. Of course, our children would be my top priority, but I would prefer to convince my family first before doing anything. But why are you asking me that? Asked Ashura after reaching this conclusion. Why was Ed asking her all these questions? Well, before I answer your question, what do you think of my cruelty just now? Asked Edward as he wanted to see her opinion of the way he behaved a little earlier. I did not like that side of you. I was scared a little. Said Ashura as she remembered the cruel smile on Edward's face when he talked about killing children. I want you to be crueler than me. You are the children's mother, after all. You have to turn into a tigress or a snake for the sake of our children. Anything that might cause them a problem, even if it was just a tiny one, consider them as a threat. Till now, I do not trust any of my brothers, and I am ready to kill them myself if I consider them a threat to my children's future. I wanted you to do the same. Said Edward as he tried to use Ashura's weakness to change her mind. He wanted to see her as his partner in his future crimes. Ashura was shocked by what Edward had just said. Although she knew about Edward's relationship with his brothers in the last 2 months, she still got surprised. Although Ashura knew that he did not like Robert or Renly, she saw his interactions with Stannis and thought that the two were on good terms. But she just heard that Edward would kill all his brothers for the sake of his children if he considered them as threats. Could she do something like that? She could not even think of hurting her siblings, let alone killing them. Why was Edward this cruel? For their children, he said. But why would protecting their children require all that cruelty? 4. Chapter 68, A Real Talk with Ashura Part 2. Why are you saying something like that? Asked Ashura with some fear in her eyes. Tell me, Ash. What would be the perfect gift that I could leave for my children before I die? Asked Edward with a smile. He wanted Ashura to reach this conclusion herself. He had seen her ambitions in the past 2 months. Although Edward thought of her ambitions so narrow compared to his, he knew that she liked to befriend many lords and pave the road for herself and her future children. But compared to the whole Westeros, her ambitions were so small to be even mentioned. Ashura thought for an answer to Edward's question. She started from the bottom, where he would leave all his wealth and lordship to them. After some thought and conclusion, Edward could see the shock and horror in her eyes. She looked at his eyes to find confirmation of her thoughts. You don't mean? Said Ashura with a horrified tone. If it was really true, that meant that Edward was playing a significant and dangerous game that might even get the both of them killed with their children. You should always aim high when you dream. Said Edward with a smile on his face. Everyone could see his real ambitions at this moment. You know the consequences of such a thing. You could get yourself killed, not to mention me, our children, and your family. Said Ashura with a panicked voice. Although, if Edward succeeded, it would be a great gift. If he failed, everything would vanish in a moment. That was why I was preparing since I was 12, and the final result would only come when our children are our age now. We might even have grandchildren by then. Said Edward with a calm tone that did not hide anything. He did not want to hide this secret as this ambition was already known to many. Ashura took a deep breath to calm her mind. What she had just heard was a mind-blowing secret. After she calmed down, her ambitions and greed started to control her thinking. She thought of many possibilities. She thought of the day she became the queen and the day her son became the king. She started to see how Edward thought of something like that. When she heard that her friend, Elia, would marry Rhaegar and would be the queen one day, she could not help but get jealous a little. But she got rid of this thought immediately. When she was in thought, it came to her. The horrible situation that her friend would face if Edward's plan worked. Would not her friend die? Can you protect my friend, Elia, if something like that happened? I knew you might think of her as a threat, but we could at least save her life, right? Said Ashera, who did not get what Edward meant by cruelty. How could Edward let Elia and her children live? Yet, he would not kill them, but he would not help them either. You really did not understand, did you? Where is the cruelty we had just mentioned? I would promise that I would do everything I could to save Elia, but I wanted to see you change in exchange. If not for me, then for your children. My plan would take years to come to light. I would use my brother Robert as a puppet to lure out every lord's ambitions. When all the kingdoms are on fire, we would then take place and show ourselves as the heroes that came to save the day. Said Edward with an innocent smile, as if he did not just say that he wanted the other kingdoms to be on fire. When Edward thought of an idea to make Ashera believe that he had done all he could to help Elia and her children. But then he would a Lannister fuck everything up. And here, Ashera would have a grudge against the Lannister, and Edward could use this as another breaking point. Ashera nodded her head. As long as she could be of help to her love and children, she would do anything. Plus, Edward had promised her that he would save Elia, so her ambitions took over again. She began to imagine the crown and throne room where everyone in Westeros would bend the knee in front of her husband and her. She would be the most powerful lady in Westeros. Was not that a thing that would make everyone envious? Seeing that Ashera had retreated to her dreamland, Edward's hands started to touch everywhere again. Although Ashera's breasts were not as big as Gisela's, they were still big enough to satisfy him. That was why Edward's hand would sneak to Ashera's breasts every now and then. Feeling Edward's hand movement, a moan escaped Ashera's mouth. She liked this feeling a lot. Although she played a little with her childhood friend when they were young, she was a virgin right at the moment. That was the reason that she was more sensitive. Ashera had still not gone on her adventures, as she did not have the chance to leave for King's Landing. Ashera started to respond to Edward's approaches. She started kissing him passionately while moving in his lap. They continued like that for a few minutes before Edward stopped and looked at his violet eyes. You knew that those eyes of yours were the first thing that attracted me. They are so beautiful. No wonder everyone is calling you the Witch of Westeros, said Edward as he touched her face while looking at her eyes. Those eyes of Ashera were like magic in his eyes. They made Edward lose control of himself at their first meeting, and he was angry at himself after he got his mind back. But since he was going to marry the witch that had those eyes, he decided to enjoy them. He still had a long way with her if he did not want her to turn into a weakness that he could not protect. Edward was going to supervise Ashera's training himself, especially in daggers and poison. Those were the best ways that a woman could use to defend herself well. Of course, if Ashera wanted to learn how to use the sword, Edward would teach her. Ashera looked at Edward's face as she started recalling their first meeting. It was a pleasant encounter that brought her to this point. She had thought that Edward was a merchant at first, but he turned to be one of the most powerful lords in Westeros. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69, Teasing and Arthur's Fate. Only my eyes? Teased Ashera as she knew that Edward was holding himself back in the last 2 months. He had told her that he could wait for their bedding ceremony to do the thing. Your eyes, your face, your tits, and of course, your ass, said Edward as he touched every part he said before slapping her on the ass. He wished for nothing more than fucking her, but he wanted to make it remarkable. Are not you going to tell me the rest of your plans? Said Ashera as she wanted to know what sort of trouble she was going to marry. Her lover had just told her that he was preparing to end the fucking Targaryen density. She wanted to open his head and see how Edward's brain was working too. Not today, Ash. Not today. When you are ready, you would be my partner in this shit mess, said Edward while looking into her eyes. Even if he was mesmerized by her beauty, Edward was not going to spell out all his secret. He told her the other secret to test her and let her know what she was getting herself in. Ashra pouted her mouth a little. She was not happy with what Edward said, but she knew that she might not have the ability to face the next secret. If the first one made her speechless, what would a second do? But she had to try teasing him a little. Ashra was curious, after all. And now? Asked Ashra while kissing Edward's neck. She wanted to see how much he could resist her. That won't do. I already gained some resistance against witches, said Edward with a smile on his face. He did not endure the last 2 months for anything. Edward did not want to be helpless in front of Ashra or any beautiful witch again. He had to have some self-control. You sure, Ed? Asked Ashra as she put one of her hands on his cock from over the clothes. She wanted to see how long he could last. I can still take that, said Edward with a smile, but a drop of sweat appeared on his face. It was still torture, after all. What about this? Asked Ashra as she took out her left breast while pulling Edward's hand to put it on her breast. She was still smiling while doing that. I told you I could resist this much, said Edward with a distorted smile. Ashra's smile was like a demon's at that moment. Before Ashra could do anything more, Edward grabbed her hands. He knew how daring this woman was, and if he did not stop her, he was sure that she was ready to get naked at the moment. What is wrong? Don't you want to see more? Asked Ashra with an innocent smile as if she did not answer. No wonder this woman could attract those flies. Edward had to hide her well, or else, too, the author himself could not imagine the consequences. Ashra could be wilder than Cersei, for let's stop it here, or I won't be able to hold it anymore, said Edward as he longed to eat Ashra's up, so he had to stop her at this moment or he would set the monster free. Ashra pouted a little as she loved to tease Edward, who was in love with her. But she suddenly had an idea. Ashra remembered one of their previous conversations. She decided to tease him a little more. Am I not pretty enough? I heard you did it with that whore at once. Are you telling me that you prefer her to me? Said Ashra as she started teasing him again. Edward had explained to her everything about his adventures with the Horrors of Stormsland and the Vale. He even had a dreamy expression when he described Gisela's curves. Edward could only scratch his head after hearing her question. He could only blame his uncle, Helden, for being talkative. After Edward appeased her a little, Ashra thought of something of great importance. She looked at Edward's eyes at once and asked, "What about my brother, Arthur? You two still did not reconcile with each other." "Right, I forget to ask, but don't tell me you will hurt my brother in the process? He is just a king's guard," asked Ashra after she remembered her brother's position. She knew that Edward and Arthur did not see eye to eye, and after hearing Edward's plan and knowing how her brother was loyal to Rhaegar, she was afraid for his life. "I don't like your brother, and you knew it. He is just a stubborn fool who would get himself killed one day for following the wrong person. I will try to protect him, but as I told you before, if he insisted on being the same fool he is now, don't blame me," said Edward as his expression changed a little. He had a big argument with Arthur a month ago. Edward had advised Arthur to work for him, and Edward would make him a lord in Stormsland. Although Edward knew he would refuse, he still offered. Edward even advised him to take every action wisely and not do whatever Rhaegar told him without thinking. Edward did not want Arthur to help Rhaegar in kidnapping Lyanna. But Arthur refused his advice and even insulted him, saying that Edward was without honor for asking Arthur to break his oath. Edward got angry at once and called him Arthur the Fool. He orders everyone in the castle to call him that. Ashra freaked a little. She was closer to Arthur than Arnold, and she depended a lot on him. She was also proud of her brother. The Sword of the Morning had gained honor for every member in House Dane 1. "I am not trying to change your decisions. I know that you are doing that for our future and our children's sake, but can you, at least, forgive him? If he behaves like an idiot, you can imprison him. I am sure we would be able to use him after some time," said Ashra, trying to sound cruel but as if her kindness would escape Edward. Edward knew that she wanted to save her brother and was trying to act in front of him. Edward thought a lot about what he could in Arthur's situation. For Elia, he could push the blame on the Lannisters. But Edward could not put all the blame on Ned Stark in Arthur's case. If Edward wanted to control the North in the future, he would marry one of his sons to Ned's daughter. So Edward could not afford to push the blame on Ned. On the contrary, he wanted Ashra and Ned to have a good relationship for their future, and because the man was his friend. Chapter 70, The Fourth Day. Capturing Arthur was a good idea. But he would face many problems in the future. As one of Rhaegar's helpers, Robert would want him dead. Not to mention, Arthur might side with Daenerys when she came to Westeros. But it was a good gamble. If Edward could persuade the Sword of the Morning to join him, it would be a large gain. Edward could use Arthur's affection towards Ashera to achieve such a result, but it was not guaranteed that he could pull something like that off. If I put him in a dungeon, would you be able to persuade him? A lot would want him dead at that time, said Edward after some thought. He could always kill Arthur if he did not listen to him. He would give him a chance as the man was a sword genius after all. I am sure I could do that, my love, said the delighted Ashera as she gave Edward a kiss. She was sure that Edward would do that because of her. She did not know that Edward was already thinking of something like that only because of Arthur's service. If Ashera could not persuade Arthur, Edward would get rid of him. This is my bottom line, Ash. It would be the last favor I give you. If he could not persuade your brother, you would kill him yourself, said Edward with a determined voice. He was giving Ashera empty promises. He would only pretend that he was trying, but in fact, he would do the opposite. Ashera's face changed a little after hearing Edward's last sentence, but she managed to nod her head. Edward had already agreed to her request, and if she could not change her brother's mind after that, it would be her fault. When Edward and Ashera continued their talk and teasing for the rest of the day. They liked to tease each other, especially during such exciting times. Soon, the second and third day had passed. Edward had faced a knight in the third day from House Leaford and won in the first round. Although the man was from Westerlands, Edward would not kill every opponent he would face. Soon, the fourth day came. This day was only for melee competition. Today is the big day, huh? I will prove my strength in front of everyone in Westeros tonight. And since I do not plan to participate in Harrenhal, this would be my last chance to defeat Arthur and Barristan, thought Edward while walking to the waiting area. He was planning for this fight since long ago. Edward had to fight his brother, Robert, as well. Edward thought that Robert only participated this time to fight him as Edward did not give a chance for the previous 4 years. It was probably Robert's last chance, as well, to defeat Edward and prove that he was not inferior to him. When Edward entered the waiting area, he found the squires putting heavy armors on everyone. They were all getting ready to enter the field. Edward also saw 3 of his men there. He greeted them before moving forward to check on everyone. When Robert saw Edward coming in his direction, he grumbled a little. Although the relationship between the brothers was really bad, they still talked a little with each other. And since Robert saw Edward, he had to greet him. It would look bad in the eyes of the outsiders if he did not. Although Robert did not care about their opinions, he cared about his family's reputation. Edward, said Robert while nodding his head. It was such a simple greeting as he did not plan to say anything more. Oh, Robert. You are here, said Edward while nodding his head back. We did not fight in the last few years, did we? Asked Edward as he wanted to tease Robert a little. He wanted to see his reaction. Changing his attitude did not mean that he changed his feelings. Edward still hated Robert to the core, and there was no room for reconciliation. We did not have a good fight in 4 years, said Robert while holding his hammer hard. He did not manage to snatch even a small win in his life. Today, he was going all out against Edward. You seem prepared. You sure you will defeat me this time? Asked Edward as he looked at Robert, who had a confident expression. Yet, a sure thing that Robert spent all his time training. He was not like his brother, Edward, who had to put and execute plans to develop Storm's Land in the past year or organize his men. What Robert focused on in the past 4 years was his training and fighting. Although he spent much time whoring, it was not on the same level as the show. Since Edward stood in front of Robert like a huge stone, he was more determined to train himself to defeat Edward. Edward did not know that he was the reason for the change in Robert's attitude. Robert was so focused on Edward that he did not drink or whore unless his urges kicked in. I have been training for this moment. It would be my win this time, said Robert while holding his hammer high. We will see. Don't grumble when I defeat you, said Edward with a smile. He wanted to have a test of Robert's strength as well. Robert had changed a lot in the past few years, and Edward hoped that he could enjoy his fight. Edward then left Robert alone and moved to Barristan and Arthur, who had already worn their armor. If it is not Sir Barristan, sell me and my brother by law, Arthur fucking Dane, said Edward as he greeted Sir Barristan and mocked Arthur a little. Edward was still angry at the man for refusing his offer. One Lord Baratheon, said Barristan as he greeted Edward back. Edward and Barristan had some sort of respect relationship, at least Edward did. He respected the man. Although Barristan admired Edward's talent, he did not try to get close to him. "What do you want?" said the annoyed Arthur as he put his hand on his sword, as a way to threaten Edward. He did not like Edward, and if not for his sister, he would never agree to this marriage. "You don't have to be in a hurry. We would all have a good fight out there. You do not have to be so eager to get defeated," said Edward, as Arthur was his main goal in his plans. Arthur and Barristan were on the same level in swordsmanship. But adding Arthur's dawn, Arthur was a little better. Chapter 71, Fighting Robert. Arthur ignored Edward. He knew the more he talked with Edward, the angrier he got. He just had to stay away from Edward in the future. Edward smiled a little towards his reaction. He did not waste more time and started changing. He decided to use light armor with his spear in this competition. Yet, it might be unsuitable against all those heavy armors, but Edward would depend on his agility and dodging ability to fight in this messy situation. Soon, the melee fight began, with over 40 knights and few squires who wanted to make a name for themselves. The speaker introduced the contestants but concentrated on the main players in this fight. Those with titles shined the most. The speaker introduced Arthur as the Sword of the Morning and Barristan as Barristan the Bold. When it came to Edward, the speaker spoke enthusiastically. Edward was the one who was paying him, after all. He introduced him as the Mighty Stag and the Golden Spear. Edward smiled after seeing all this. It would be a real challenge for him, as he had to face all those people while protecting his back. He moved with his elastic steel spear in his hand towards the round area. All the other participants followed him, ready for the big fight. Edward looked at his brother Robert, Arthur Dane, Barristan, Edward's deputy Cullen, and the other two. "Let's defeat the others first before we have our fight. I want to have a one-on-one fight with all of you with the others' interference. We will have our fight after smashing those shits' head," said Robert while nodding his head. He only participated in this competition to defeat his brother and did not care about the rest. "A good idea," agreed Sir Barristan, as he had not witnessed Edward's strength since they saved the king. "Good," said Arthur. No one wanted to kick Edward's ass more than him at the moment, and he would not allow anyone to interfere. "It had been some time since we had a good fight, my lord," said Cullen while smiling. It had been a while indeed since he had fought with any of his 8 commanders. The other two agreed, and the rest shifted their heads toward the other contestants. Edward ignored the rest and took some steps to fight the first opponent. He used his spear magnifically. It was as if the spear angled to make full curves while Edward was dodging left and right. Edward was literally jumping from a place to another. With his light armor and marvelous spear arts, he was defeating an opponent after the other. Edward kept track of the rest. When he saw Robert smashing his opponents with his hammer and Arthur hacking them with his sword, he looked back to regain his focus. He went to find another opponent. As there were many, Edward would thrust his spear while dodging a sword attack. He would attack the weakness of those knights. Edward would attack the legs, the wrists, and the head. He was not an idiot to go for their fortified heavy armors. He would hear an agonizing scream every time he attacked with his spear. It did not take long before only 7 remained. Arthur Dane, Barristan Selmy, Robert Baratheon, Edward Baratheon, John Cullen, Geoffrey Frog, and Benjamin Miniclaw. But Benjamin had a cut on the side of his leg and had to quit. He did not want to risk any more injury. That was what Edward always told them. After Benjamin left the field, the rest divided themselves as everyone chose his opponent. Edward would fight Robert. Barristan would fight Cullen while Arthur would fight Geoffrey. Edward knew that John and Geoffrey wanted to fight the famous too, so he did not mind and decided to fight Robert first. Everyone started fighting at once while Edward looked at Robert. "Here's your chance, Robert. Let's see what you got," said Edward with a smile. Robert's level at the moment should be near his peak from the show when he defeated Rhaegar. That was why Edward was excited to fight him. "This time is my win," said Robert as he started to attack Edward with his hammer. But in front of the long spear and Edward's movements, Robert could not even touch him but instead had to stay on the defending side. Edward wanted to finish this fight as fast as possible as he had to save some energy for the next battles, but he had to take it seriously. Robert was now the great warrior that could end the Targaryen dynasty. While Edward was dodging Robert's attack and attacking him with his spear, Robert launched a mad attack that made Edward slip. Robert wanted to take the chance and attack Edward at once, but Edward managed to dodge his hammer while using his spear's rod to attack Robert's wrist. After giving Robert his chance, Edward increased his power output and attack speed. He decided to attack Robert with everything he got. He could not take it easy anymore. Robert could only defend himself and depend on his armor to take some of the attacks. After a few minutes, Edward decided to end it by attacking Robert's leg, and he managed to cut his right leg's side. Edward did not wait for Robert to balance himself and attacked the back of Robert's hand that he used to hold the hammer, making the hammer fall down. Seeing Edward's spear pointing to his head, Robert grumbled. He was feeling hopeless at the moment. After all the training that he had, he still could not beat Edward. What was the point in all his training then? Why am I still losing? I trained day and night for this moment, but I still lost. This is shit, man. I need to fuck some whore, thought Robert as he was looking at his brother's spear. One, you did well. You are much better than before, said Edward as he shifted his eyes towards the other's fight. That was all he would say. He was not confronting Robert or something. He was only giving his honest opinion. Robert nearly got him there, so Edward had to at least say that to him. Edward was not going to fight him again soon anyway. Robert looked at his brother's back as he felt different emotions at the moment. He was angry at himself for losing and disappointed at the same time. He could only shake his head and go. Chapter 72, The Winner. Edward's focus was on the two fights next to him. John Clyn was able to hold himself very well against Arthur, although Arthur was a little better. As for Geoffrey, he struggled a little against Barristan, but he would be able to hold on for a little more. It seemed that Edward had underestimated Barristan and Arthur's abilities. Barristan was an experienced swordsman, while Arthur was brilliant when it came to swordsmanship. Edward thought that his men's level was equal to them in strength, but he was wrong. But he was sure that with his men's hard work and talent, they would be able to at least tie with Arthur and Barristan by the time of Harrenhal. They were only missing the experience to fight the two men. Barristan had gone through 2 wars, after all. It did not take long before Barristan was able to disarm Geoffrey. Looking at Sir Barristan, who was almost out of his breath after this hard fight, Edward decided to wait for him to rest a little before they had their duel. 5 minutes passed, and there was still no clear winner between Arthur and Clyn. Edward turned to Barristan, who had been resting all this time. Can you keep up? If you can't, I could still wait a little more, said Edward as he looked at Sir Barristan. He wanted to defeat the man in his full strength. It might be the last time that Edward would fight with honor. Everything after this point would depend on the scheme, as Edward would hide behind the scenes after that. Edward, who was only satisfying his goal to participate in such tournaments, thought it would be his loss if he was in the Game of Thrones and did not participate in even the tournament that he held. Yet, I can keep on, said Barristan with a smile as he respected Edward more for waiting for him to catch his breath after he defeated Geoffrey. We should end it then, said Edward as he thrust his spear towards Sir Barristan, who used his sword to repel his attack. Barristan was a perfect swordsman who could swing his sword between his left and right hand at the right moment to make a surprise slash. He would dodge or use his armor to parry Edward's spear. Barristan was really a seasoned warrior that Edward had to take seriously. Edward and Barristan fought like this for 3 minutes before Edward saw a flow in Barristan movements. Edward at once used his spear steel rod to tap on Barristan's chest as hard as he could. Barristan could not manage to keep his balance and fell to the ground. Barristan dodged Edward's attacks while still on the ground, but it did not take long before Edward could disarm him. It was a good fight that took a lot of Edward's concentration to observe Barristan's every move. It was a good fight, Sir Barristan, said Edward as he gave his hand to Sir Barristan, helping him to stand. Indeed, it was, Lord Baratheon. You are a good fighter as always, said Barristan with a smile. He enjoyed his fight just now. He fought hard to create a flow in Edward's fighting style so that he could use it, but he ended creating a flow in his own movements. Edward looked at Arthur, who was still exhausted after his fight with Clyn. Yet, Arthur won after nearly 20 minutes of fighting, and he got cuts on his right leg and left arm. It seemed that Clyn was an opponent that was on the same level as Arthur. Arthur only managed to win after Clyn's sword was cut in half after the continuous fight with Arthur. Would you be able to fight like that? I do not want to hear the people say that I bullied you, said Edward with a smile. He was mocking Arthur for getting beaten like this by Clyn, while Clyn got out with only a small cut on his side. Worry about yourself. I can take you on any time, said Arthur with an annoyed expression. He knew that he could not defeat Edward like that, nor Arthur was sure he could defeat Edward in the first place. Edward's man gave him a hard time, and Arthur had to go all out and depend on his sword, Dawn, to defeat him. Would he be able to defeat Edward when he had suffered like that at the hands of Edward's man? Arthur had different thoughts at the moment. He wanted to teach Edward a lesson to make sure that Edward would not look down on everyone again, but what could he do in this situation but fight? Edward did not wait for him for long and made the first move. He thrust his spear at Arthur's leg. Arthur, who was having a difficult time already, broke out from his frozen state when he saw Edward's attack, quickly blocking his spear with his two swords. Arthur then countered Edward with a slash from his sword, but Edward avoided the sword and attacked Arthur on the chest with his spear's rod. Arthur growled and took several steps back. He did not give up, and with Dawn in his main hand, while the other handled backhandedly, he began an attack like a swirl of a tornado. Edward kept his flashing smile as he dodged Arthur's attacks. With his light armor and nimble movements, he did not find it hard, at all, since Arthur's leg got injured in his fight with Clyn. Edward kept dodging until he saw a chance and attacked Arthur's uninjured leg with his spear, resulting in a somewhat deep cut on Arthur's leg. Edward did not stop at that but used the back of his spear to attack Arthur's left hand, disarming his second sword. At the moment, Arthur was only holding his sword, Dawn, with his two legs injured. It did not take long before Edward was able to disarm Arthur's Dawn, making Arthur fall down in the process. Arthur grumbled a little as this was not the result he yearned for, but he could not do anything else. He could only stare at Edward's spear pointed at his face. "I yield," said Arthur, reluctantly. But what could he do in a situation like this? He got himself already disarmed with a spear pointed towards his head. "Good fight, Sir Arthur. Although that was not what I expected, it is okay. You couldn't win even if you were uninjured," said Edward while not forgetting to mock Arthur a little. Chapter 73, A Talk with the Prince and Tywin Lannister. "Shut up," said Arthur, annoyed. He knew that would happen if he lost to his fucking brother by law. If he is not Asher's betrothed, I would have put my sword at his chest. I wish I could kick his fucking ass, thought Arthur as he was looking at the annoying Edward while gritting his teeth. "Don't give me that look. Even if you're in your best condition, I think Sir Barristan is better and more experienced than you," said Edward as he was giving his honest opinion this time. Edward then gave his hand to Arthur to help him up, which Arthur took reluctantly. It was a good fight, and he had to admit that. The crowd then became boisterous after seeing all this. Hearing the speaker announcing the end of the melee fight with Edward as the winner, everyone could not help but stand up and cheer. Edward decided to enjoy the moment a little more and left his golden spear up high in the sky. The crowd got fired up more and shouted at Edward as if they were trying to get his attention. After giving himself the prize for his win, he took his leave to the waiting area, where he met Arthur and Barristan. After teasing Arthur a little more and changing his clothes, he retreated to his tent. It was a long day, and he needed some rest. He was escorted by two of his men to his tent when he saw several figures waiting for him in front of his tent. Clyn, Joffrey, and the rest of his commanders were waiting there. To their left, he could see Prince Rhaegar with Jon. Edward could even see his foster father, Ned, and Robert. He even found Tywin fucking Lannister among them. What in seven hells? Don't tell me they are here to congratulate me? If they are, why are Tywin with them? Could not they pick a better time to do that? I am fucking tired, thought Edward as he looked at the smiling faces around him. He wanted to give them some punches on their faces at the moment. He could only sigh and allow them to enter his tent. He could not behave like an ungrateful scum. Don't stand there, my lords, my prince. Please, have a seat inside the tent, said Edward with a smile while cursing all of them inside. Luckily for me, I told Ashera and my mother not to come this time. I told them that I would be tired and they could speak later, thought Edward as he looked at Tywin's and Rhaegar's face. Rhaegar was giving the loving and flashing smile that he always had as for Tywin. He was giving Edward the most disgusting smile he had ever seen. Or that was what Edward thought. After everyone entered the tent and took their seat, they started giving Edward some praises. Soon, the unimportant lords began leaving one after another after some pleasantries. You were good out there, Edward, said Jon Arryn as he congratulated Edward. He was really happy by what Edward had achieved till the moment. Edward was a great lord and a powerful fighter. Thanks, Lord Arryn, said Edward with an innocent and sincere smile. You really did great by waiting for Sir Barristan and Sir Arthur to rest before fighting them, said the Honorable Ned Stark. He would do the same if he got into such a situation. That was why he liked Edward's behavior. Ned did not know that Edward did not do that for honor, but just for his personal satisfaction. Since Edward would not mostly fight them one-on-one again, he had to take the chance. "You would do the same, Ned," said Edward with a smile that hid some mockery. He always disliked this part of Ned. What was honor good for if it got you killed? Robert kept staring at Edward without saying anything. He did not know if he would have another chance to fight Edward again. Seeing this, Edward decided to act a little gently with Robert. He would make him a puppet king after all. "One, you did well, Robert. Maybe one day, you might defeat me," said Edward with a smile that Robert saw as the devil's smile. Robert could only nod after hearing that, and it did not take long before John and the other two with the Starks left the tent. Edward then shifted his eyes towards the prince. He had already accepted the praise first from Rhaegar before anyone else. Edward was wondering why he did not leave. At the moment, only the prince's group and Tywin's were in the tent beside his men. "What can I do for you, my prince?" asked Edward after seeing the look of hesitation on Rhaegar's face. He did not know why Rhaegar was behaving like a pussy right at the moment. "I just wanted to tell you that this tournament was the greatest in the history of Westeros. It would take a lot to surpass its level," said Rhaegar with a smile. He was pointing at the tourney he was planning to hold. The tourney of Harrenhal was supposed to be the greatest, but with Edward's interference, it would be hard for Rhaegar. Rhaegar was already in discussion with Lord Wynd about the tournament of Harrenhal. He was planning to gather all the lords to discuss the replacement of his father. If Edward had told him a little earlier about this tourney, Rhaegar would cancel his plans with Lord Wynd and use this tourney to his advantage. But Edward, knowing what Rhaegar was planning, delayed the announcement of this tourney. Rhaegar would have to fork a greater sum of gold dragons to best Edward's tourney. "Thank you, Your Highness. I am glad you liked it. If you want any help in the future, please, don't hesitate to ask," said Edward with a friendly smile. He would send some of his men to help Rhaegar waste a large sum of his gold to hold the tourney of Harrenhal. I would do, Lord Baratheon. "Now, if you excuse me," said Rhaegar as he stood up to leave. "Of course, Your Highness. Oh, by the way, Sir Barristan, could you tell my brother-by-law not to act like a sore loser?" said Edward as he did not forget to send a teasing message to Arthur. Barristan could only smile and shake his head. The two of them were family, but Edward always liked to annoy Arthur. After Rhaegar's group left, Edward could not help but look at his rival, Tywin. He was wondering why this man decided to come. Not only that, but Tywin came to congratulate Edward himself. He was a really shameless man that could do anything for his family and power. 1. Chapter 74, Tywin offering his daughter. "You are still here, Lord Tywin. I thought you came here with the prince," said Edward, trying to act friendly as much as he could. He was acting completely different than their first meeting. Although Edward could not wait to kill Tywin, he thought that there was a chance for them to work together. At least, they could help each other in putting an end to the Targaryen. "Not at all, we just met on our way here," said Tywin with the same haughty attitude that he always had. "Oh, then what could I do for you, Lord Tywin?" asked Edward. He wanted to know the reason why Tywin came all the way here. Tywin looked around the tent before he shifted his eyes back to Edward. "I think we should discuss this alone," said Tywin, telling Edward to send everyone out for some time. Edward looked at Tywin's eyes, but after seeing the seriousness in Tywin's eyes, Edward could only sigh. "Clyn, take everyone and wait outside," said Edward without turning back. Clyn nodded his head and signaled the rest of Edward's men and Tywin's to follow him. After they left, only Edward and Tywin were in the tent. Edward shifted his eyes towards Tywin. "You can say it now, Lord Tywin, right?" said Edward. He would do this anyway as he wanted to discuss a plan with Tywin, but wanted to know Tywin's motives at first. "I can call you Edward. You are fine with that, right?" said Tywin as if he cared if Edward refused or not. He was only trying to act nicely as Edward had changed his attitude towards him. If Edward had spoken like before, he would not mind calling Edward a brat. Edward sighed and nodded his head. Since he wanted to hear what Tywin wanted to say, he had to endure his arrogance and haughty attitude. 3. "Why are you marrying that Danes girl?" asked Tywin as if he found Ashera disgusting. Actually, Tywin hated Dorne to the core at the moment. So whether the person is a Martell or not, Tywin would not stand him. He would rather see Dorne burn to the ground than anything else. 1. "What do you mean by that, Lord Tywin?" asked Edward, who got a little annoyed by Tywin's attitude. "Don't act stupid in front of me. You know what I mean." The Danes are just a rural house from Dorne who resided in Starfall City. What would you get from marrying from them? Would you get any benefits from them? I bet they were the ones who got all the benefits," said Tywin, who wanted to put an end to this marriage. He came to this tourney for a reason. Would he get out of his way for nothing? He did not attend any tourney since the one he held in Lannisport. "Lord Tywin, when you married Lady Joanna, was you expecting any benefits in return?" asked Edward. He always wanted to know the answer to this question. Tywin, who married his lover, Joanna, would force his children to marry for the sake of the family. Why did not Tywin do the same? He could get more benefits by marrying a daughter from a great house. After hearing Edward's question, Tywin's expression changed a little. Edward's question had reminded him of his dead lover. He was always feeling regret when it came to her. "It was the best and the worst decision in my life. Now, I am living with only my memory of her. But I thought you were smarter than that. I thought you would choose a powerful house to get more benefits," said Tywin as he remembered the past at first. Then he focused on what he came here for. "And who do you think I should marry then, Lord Tywin?" asked Edward, who started thinking of the possibility that he had thrown away. "Tywin is really trying to make me marry his daughter. You really had to be this shameless to win the game. We had rumor battles not long ago," thought Edward as he was giving a weird look to Tywin. After hearing Edward's question, Tywin looked at Edward as if he was telling him, "What do you think?" He was giving Edward a weird expression. He did not want to play this game with Edward anymore. Edward's acting was bad in his eyes. "You know who I am talking about here. So stop acting dumb and give me an answer," said Tywin when he saw that Edward would continue acting like that if he did not say anything directly. He was not desperate to offer his daughter like unwanted products, but after the humiliation he had taken from the Targaryen, he wanted to marry her to the most influential family after them. Tywin could not find anyone better than the Targaryen and the Lannister except the Baratheon, especially with Edward as the Lord. Edward thought for a minute. He wanted to give Tywin an answer that would not offend him much. Edward was not thinking about Tywin's feelings or anything, but he had to act shamelessly. He had learned that from Tywin, who had put down the grudges and came here today. Tywin was the best in the game, and Edward would have to pick a thing or two from him. "I cannot agree to your request, Lord Tywin. I have already given my word, but I can give you another promise. If you still want it in the future and there were no disputes between the two of us, I can marry my first son to your future granddaughter," said Edward with a smile. He started to play by the rule of the game. So although he did not like Tywin and still hated him for his assassination attempt, he saw the benefit in doing that. After he got rid of the Lannisters in the future, would not it be much easier for him to control Westerlands if he had a Lannister as a granddaughter? Plus, he would not play by all the rules. Who said that he would appoint his first son as the heir to Stormsland? In fact, Edward was thinking of a devious plan to track all the benefits to Stormsland. He would announce to everyone that every one of his sons had a chance to succeed him. That would make it a competition, especially after Stormsland became the Kingdom of Storms and he became the Storm King. 6. Chapter 75, Working with Tywin. Tywin looked at Edward with some dissatisfaction. He did not like this suggestion. He did not know if he would have a granddaughter in the future or not. Plus, he was worried about his daughter's marriage at the moment. "I thought you were smart, but it seemed that you did not know how to play this game," said Tywin with some disappointment. He thought that Edward was smart enough. That was why he offered his daughter to him. In the show, Tywin never discussed his daughter's marriage with anyone besides Rhaegar and Robert. He only married his daughter to Robert after he became the king. He would never think of him if it was not for that. Tywin could only shake his head as he prepared to stand up and leave. He did not see any point in staying in Edward's tent anymore. He wanted to have part of Edward's new wealth by marrying his daughter to him, but it seemed that luck was not on his side. "Wait. I might not have agreed to your request, but I have another proposal to discuss with you. I think you would like it, Lord Tywin. So please, return to your seat," said Edward with a smile. He knew he would get Tywin's attention the minute he mentioned the destruction of the Targaryen. Tywin turned his eyes back to Edward but did not return to his seat. He wanted to hear what Edward had to say first. If the topic not to his liking, he would leave at once. He was not ready to stay and listen to any nonsense from Edward like back then. "Taking down House Targaryen," said Edward with a smile. He only said those words as they were enough to convince Tywin to sit back on the chair. No one wanted the destruction of the Targaryen's house more than Tywin. He hated them to the core for all the previous humiliation. Tywin even hated them more than Edward did. And although Edward hated the Targaryens and especially Rhaegar, his hate could not even compare to a drop of Tywin's. After hearing Edward's words, Tywin's eyes lit up. Although he was the hand of the king and he should kill Edward after hearing such words, he still suppressed his urges to listen to him. And although he could use such an opportunity to destroy Edward, the Targaryens' destruction was more significant to Tywin than killing Edward. But still, Tywin decided to test the water at first before deciding on anything. "You know I am the king's hand, and I could kill you for treason for saying such words," said Tywin, trying to see any change in Edward's expression. "You know you could not do anything without a witness. Plus, who would the king believe more? Me of you? The son of his close friend and cousin, or the friend he hated more than anything? Plus, you are smarter than that, Lord Tywin. So please sit down," said Edward while smirking at Tywin. He knew that Tywin was bluffing with him, so he had to retort back one. After hearing these words, Tywin looked at Edward deeply before returning back to his seat. It was as Edward said. After Edward's little tricks in the past few years, the relationship between the Ares and Tywin reached a red line. "Speak," said Tywin after sitting down. He would not waste time here. He wanted to hear if Edward had a more useful plan or not. "I know you are the one who hates the Targaryen the most, Lord Tywin. So let's not play the blame and guilt game," said Edward as he saw that Tywin started pretending that he had nothing to do with what he had to say. Tywin gave him a look that said, "I don't know, what are you talking about?" He was a little surprised as he always tried to hide it. He would always act as the victim to Ares' hate and would not retort or say anything. He did not even resign his position as the king's hand after all that time. Seeing the look on Tywin's face, Edward decided to continue what he had to say. Tywin was shameless and would not admit such a thing in front of Edward. "Let's play a game, Lord Tywin. All we want is to sully the relationship between the king and one of the great houses. What do you think?" said Edward. He was sure that Tywin was smart enough to get what he meant and would not require further explanation. Tywin could only shake his head after hearing Edward's word. Was not that what he was doing already? Would he wait for Edward to tell him something as trivial as that? "Don't shake your head like that. I knew you are already doing something like that behind the scenes. Plus, 2 heads are better than 1. If we could combine our methods, we would be able to spread rumors and more dissatisfaction. What you are doing is targeting all the great houses at the same time. That is why you are not getting good results fast enough. We should target either the North or the Riverland. Those 2 are the ones with the most ties to other houses at the moment," said Edward with an innocent smile, shocking Tywin a little. No one knew how far the scale of Edward's intelligence network built by the Shadow Legion had spread. He could already see and hear everything in the great houses by now, so it was normal for him to catch a spy or 2 working under Tywin's. "You know a lot, do not you? Come on. Continue," said Tywin after a little pause. What could Edward do anyway? If Edward used those spies or words against him, he would pretend that he did not know anything and Edward was trying to smear his name. "Do not worry, Lord Tywin. We are just having a nice chat here. So what do you think? Should we work together?" asked Edward with a smile. He knew Tywin would agree in the end, even if he pretended otherwise. Tywin was looking at Edward's eyes. It seemed the brat from the other day had grown a lot that he could not stop him anymore. Tywin was thinking of every way possible to marry his daughter to Edward. He thought of making Edward the king after getting rid of the Targaryens and then force him to marry his daughter if he wanted to stabilize the 7 kingdoms. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.